The Duke of Blackthorn had waited until the last guest had left before delivering the sentence that would define their marriage. Outside, the bells of St. George's Chapel had long fallen silent. The final carriage wheels had disappeared into the London fog. The candles in Blackthorn House burned low, casting pools of golden light across polished marble floors and dark walnut paneling. Clara Whitmore stood alone beside the tall window of the Duchess's sitting room, her wedding gown whispering softly against the carpet whenever she shifted her weight. Hours earlier, she had walked down the aisle beneath a canopy of white roses. Hundreds of London's most influential families had watched her become a duchess. They had admired the diamonds at her throat, the lace imported from Brussels, and the magnificent title she had gained. Not one of them had known that the groom beside her had barely looked at her throughout the ceremony. The door opened behind her. She did not turn immediately. She already knew who it was. William Blackthorn, 7th Duke of Blackthorn, did not enter a room like other men. His presence arrived first. It altered the air itself. Clara watched his reflection appear in the dark glass of the window. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in formal black evening attire. His expression remained as composed as it had been during the wedding breakfast, during the carriage ride, during every carefully choreographed moment of the day. For several seconds neither spoke. Somewhere deeper within the house, a clock chimed 11. William finally broke the silence. "I believe honesty is preferable to false expectations." Clara slowly turned from the window. "That depends on the honesty." His grey eyes met hers. They were striking eyes. Intelligent. Controlled. Completely unreadable. "You deserve clarity regarding our arrangement." Arrangement. Not marriage. Not union. Arrangement. Clara folded her hands lightly before her. "Then I am listening, Your Grace." A faint tightening appeared around his jaw. Perhaps he disliked the title. Perhaps he disliked the entire situation. Clara could not tell. "I will provide every comfort expected of my position." His voice remained calm and precise. "You will have Blackthorn House, the country estates, financial security, complete respect, and every privilege attached to your rank." Clara nodded once. None of this surprised her. "You will never lack for anything material." He paused. Then came the words, "But I will never love you." The room seemed to grow quieter. Even the fire crackling in the hearth sounded distant. William watched her carefully. Waiting. Perhaps expecting tears. Shock. Disappointment. Some visible wound. Clara felt none of those things. Not because the words were painless. Any woman would feel the sting. But because she had expected them long before tonight. She had expected them the day his proposal arrived. She had expected them every time London whispered about the great Duke of Blackthorn and the woman he had once intended to marry. Most of all, she had expected them when she noticed the complete absence of joy in his eyes during the wedding ceremony. Clara looked steadily back at him. "I never asked you to." For the first time all evening, his expression changed. It was subtle. A flicker. A brief disruption in his perfect control. He had expected many responses. That was clearly not one of them. Clara continued before he could speak. "You are offering me honesty, Your Grace. It would be unfair not to return it." William remained silent. "I did not marry you because I expected a love story." Her voice stayed gentle. Calm. Almost conversational. "I understood exactly what this marriage was before I agreed to it." Something unreadable passed through his eyes. "Did you?" "Yes." She offered the slightest smile. "I suspect more clearly than most people in London." For a moment he seemed uncertain how to proceed. Clara found that mildly surprising. The Duke of Blackthorn was a man famous for certainty. Entire newspapers discussed his political influence. Businessmen feared disappointing him. Society hostesses rearranged guest lists for the possibility of securing his attendance. Yet tonight he looked almost unsettled. "You are remarkably composed." Clara glanced toward the dying fire. "Would you prefer hysteria?" A corner of his mouth nearly moved. Not quite a smile. Not even close. But something dangerously near one. "No." "Good." Another silence settled between them. This one felt different. Less hostile. More curious. William studied her as though encountering a puzzle he had not anticipated. Clara suspected she had become exactly that. Most women in her position would have reacted differently. Society trained them to dream of love. To measure success through affection. To believe marriage represented the culmination of every hope. Clara had learned long ago that reality rarely consulted dreams. "May I ask you something?" William said. "Of course." "Why did you agree to this marriage?" There it was. The question everyone wanted answered. Clara had heard countless versions of it during the engagement. Some phrased politely. Others hidden beneath smiles. None sincere. Why would a young woman marry a duke who offered status but not affection? Clara lowered her gaze briefly toward the wedding ring now resting upon her hand. The diamond caught the candlelight. Because it was the sensible choice. Most women would not describe becoming a duchess as merely sensible. Most women are allowed the luxury of being romantic. The answer seemed to interest him. "And you are not?" Clara looked up again. "No, Your Grace. I am not." The honesty lingered between them. William did not press further. Yet Clara could almost feel his curiosity growing. It made her unexpectedly cautious. Some truths were easier left undisturbed. Especially tonight. Outside, the fog thickened against the windows. London disappeared into silver shadows. Blackthorn House felt isolated from the rest of the world. A grand palace suspended in time. William moved toward the fireplace. His posture remained impeccable. Every movement deliberate. Controlled. "I believe separate suites would be most comfortable." Clara had anticipated that as well. "As you wish. If circumstances ever require us to appear publicly together, I trust we can present a united front." "Naturally." "Good." His tone suggested relief. Clara nearly laughed. The mighty Duke of Blackthorn appeared more comfortable negotiating parliamentary matters than speaking to his new wife. "Then I believe we understand one another." He inclined his head slightly. "I believe we do." Yet neither moved. The conversation should have ended. Somehow it had not. Clara found herself studying him more closely. The newspapers always described William Blackthorn as intimidating. Ruthless. Unapproachable. They rarely mentioned the exhaustion hidden beneath his composure. Tonight she noticed it immediately. There was a heaviness about him. The kind carried by someone who had spent years fighting battles nobody else could see. For a brief moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered his wedding night declaration and reconsidered. "You should rest, Your Grace." His gaze returned to her face. "And you?" "I suspect I shall spend the next hour removing approximately 500 hairpins." The unexpected remark earned the closest thing to amusement she had yet seen from him. A daunting task. Far more daunting than marriage, I suspect. Another silence. This one lighter. William gave a small nod. "Good night, Duchess." "Good night, Your Grace." He turned and left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Clara remained standing beside the window long after his footsteps disappeared. Her smile faded. Not because she regretted the conversation. Because she finally allowed herself a moment of honesty. The truth was that his words had hurt. Not deeply. Not catastrophically. But enough. No woman enjoyed hearing she would never be loved. Even when she expected it. Especially when she expected it. Clara drew a slow breath and looked out across the sleeping city. Somewhere beyond the fog lay thousands of homes. Thousands of marriages. Some happy. Some miserable. Some built upon affection. Others upon necessity. Hers belonged firmly in the final category. Yet strangely, she did not feel defeated. Perhaps because she had entered this marriage with open eyes. Perhaps because she understood something William Blackthorne did not. Love was not the most dangerous thing a person could lose. Respect was. Self-respect most of all. She would not sacrifice hers for anyone. Not even a duke. Across the hall, in his private suite, William Blackthorne stood alone beside a fireplace that had long since burned low. He should have felt relieved. The difficult conversation was finished. Expectations had been established. Boundaries defined. Everything should have become simpler. Instead, he found himself staring into the flames while replaying a single sentence. "I never asked you to." The words refused to leave him. They had not sounded bitter. Nor wounded. They had sounded sincere. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He had expected disappointment. He had prepared for resentment. What he had not expected was a woman who appeared entirely willing to build a life without demanding his heart. It was unfamiliar. Most people wanted something from him. Influence. Wealth. Favors. Approval. Clara Whitmore seemed to want none of it. William frowned. There was something he had missed. Some piece of the puzzle still hidden from view. He had seen it in her eyes when he asked why she agreed to marry him. A hesitation. Brief but unmistakable. She was keeping something private. The realization should not have mattered. Yet it did. Downstairs, the great clock struck midnight. A new day had begun. Their first day as husband and wife. Neither of them knew that before another year had passed, the quiet marriage begun in duty would become the center of one of London's most whispered scandals. Neither knew that enemies were already watching. Neither knew that the greatest threat to Blackthorne House would not come from politics, money, or society. It would come from secrets. And some secrets, once uncovered, changed everything. 3 months after the wedding, Blackthorne House ran with a precision that surprised nearly everyone except the woman responsible for it. The sprawling London residence occupied an entire corner of Grosvenor Square, its pale stone facade reflecting the weak sunlight of a late February morning. Footmen moved efficiently through polished corridors. Servants anticipated needs before they were spoken. Deliveries arrived and departed according to schedules that rarely varied by more than a few minutes. Guests praised the household's elegance. Merchants praised its punctual payments. Even the notoriously demanding Dowager Lady Penhurst had recently remarked that Blackthorne House had become one of the finest managed residences in London. Few people realized the transformation had begun with a notebook. Clara sat at a small writing desk near the library window, reviewing household accounts while rain tapped softly against the glass. Several ledgers lay open before her. Columns of figures filled the pages in neat handwriting. A silver clock on the mantel showed 9:30. Across the room, Mrs. Whittaker, the housekeeper, waited patiently with a stack of correspondence. "The florist has lowered his prices again, Your Grace," she said. Clara glanced at the invoice. "Good. Continue ordering from him." Mrs. Whittaker smiled faintly. "He says your recommendations have doubled his business. Then he deserves the increase." Another page turned. Another expense reviewed. Another decision made. Clara worked with quiet concentration. She neither rushed nor hesitated. Her mind moved steadily from one matter to the next. 3 months earlier she had entered Blackthorne House as a stranger. Today every servant in the household knew her preferences. More importantly, they trusted her judgment. That trust had not come easily. It had been earned one conversation at a time. One fair decision at a time. One act of consistency after another. The cook wishes to expand the menu for next week's dinner. Mrs. Whittaker continued. His Grace expects 12 guests. Clara reviewed the proposed additions. The roast pheasant stays. Remove the third dessert course. The housekeeper blinked. Remove it. No one remembers a third dessert course. They only remember whether dinner was enjoyable. Mrs. Whittaker tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile. Very good, Your Grace. After the housekeeper departed, Clara returned to her accounts. A shaft of pale sunlight briefly escaped the clouds and illuminated the desk. Her attention lingered on a separate ledger tucked beneath the others. Unlike the household books, this one remained locked. She rested her hand upon it for a moment. Then withdrew it. Not today. Some things were better left unopened. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Enter. The butler appeared. His Grace has returned earlier than expected. Clara looked up. From Parliament? Yes, Your Grace. That was unusual. William rarely returned before afternoon when Parliament was in session. Clara closed the ledger and rose. Thank you, Bennet. She expected to encounter him at dinner. Instead, she found him 15 minutes later in the library. He stood near a shelf of leather-bound volumes, reviewing correspondence with the same focused intensity he applied to nearly everything. Clara paused in the doorway. William looked up. Something almost resembling surprise crossed his features. I did not expect you. Neither did I. She approached the central table. I was told you returned early. A meeting was cancelled. He set aside a document. Mrs. Whittaker tells me the household budget has improved significantly. Clara blinked. Of all possible topics, that had not been the one she expected. That is kind of her. It is accurate. William's gaze settled upon her. The annual expenses are nearly 15% lower than last year. The previous management enjoyed expensive habits. A faint crease appeared near his brow. You say that very diplomatically. I am a Duchess. Diplomacy is expected. The corner of his mouth shifted slightly. Again, not quite a smile. Yet closer than before. Clara noticed such things more often lately. They remained rare. Still, they existed. The staff seems happier as well, he said. That is because they are happier. William leaned against the table. How did you accomplish that? I learned their names. For several seconds he simply looked at her. Clara realized he genuinely thought there might be more to the answer. That cannot be all. It is a good beginning. She crossed toward a shelf containing several travel books. People work harder for someone who sees them. You make it sound simple. Most difficult things are simple. They are merely not easy. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Merely thoughtful. It occurred to Clara that their conversations had changed gradually over the past months. The formal distance remained. Yet there was less tension now. Less caution. They occupied the same space more naturally than they once had. William broke the silence first. You have transformed my household. Clara selected a volume and examined its spine. Our household. The correction emerged before she considered it. William's expression shifted. Something softened briefly. Yes. His voice grew quieter. Our household. The words lingered unexpectedly. Clara opened the book to avoid looking directly at him. She disliked how oddly pleased the simple acknowledgement made her feel. Later that evening, she attended a dinner hosted by Lady Ravenshire. Nearly half of London's aristocracy appeared to be present. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Gentle music drifted through the air. Conversations flowed from one elegant cluster of guests to another. Clara moved through the gathering with practiced ease. She smiled when appropriate. Listened attentively. Offered polite observations. No one could accuse her of failing in her duties as Duchess of Blackthorn. Yet beneath the polished surface she recognized the familiar undercurrent. Pity. It surfaced in subtle ways. A pause too long after William's name was mentioned. A sympathetic glance. An overly careful choice of words. "You have adjusted wonderfully," Lady Havisham said during one conversation. Many young brides find the transition difficult. Clara smiled. "I have been fortunate." "Indeed." The older woman hesitated. "And His Grace?" There it was. Clara almost admired the persistence of society. 3 months had passed. Yet people remained fascinated by the state of her marriage. "His Grace is well." "Of course." Lady Havisham quickly changed the subject. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. It left Clara strangely tired. Across the room, she spotted William speaking with 2 members of Parliament. His posture remained composed. His attention focused entirely on the discussion. Several young women lingered nearby, hoping for an introduction. Clara watched them for a moment. Then looked away. The sight did not bother her. At least that was what she told herself. An hour later she found temporary refuge near a window overlooking the gardens. The cool glass reflected the candlelit room behind her. "You hide remarkably well for a duchess." Clara recognized the voice instantly. Lady Margaret Penhurst approached carrying a glass of lemonade. Unlike most members of society, Margaret possessed a refreshing inability to disguise her thoughts. "I was not aware I was hiding." "You are standing beside a curtain." Clara glanced at the curtain. A fair observation. Margaret joined her near the window. "May I ask you something inappropriate?" "You usually do." "Are you happy?" The directness startled Clara more than the question itself. For several seconds she considered a dozen possible answers. "That depends on the day." Margaret studied her carefully. "Interesting. Most people expect either yes or no. Most people are not honest." Clara laughed softly. "Neither are most duchesses." "Perhaps." Margaret lowered her voice. "The truth is, London does not understand you." Clara turned toward the ballroom. "That hardly qualifies as a tragedy." "No. But it is unusual." Margaret followed her gaze. "They expected heartbreak." Clara remained silent. Instead they found competence. Another laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Competence is not generally considered exciting. For women, no. For dukes, apparently yes. Clara looked sharply at her friend. Margaret merely smiled into her lemonade. Before Clara could question the remark, a new voice interrupted. "There you are." William had crossed the ballroom without her noticing. Several nearby conversations immediately quieted. Clara saw it happen. Society always paid attention when a duke approached his wife. Especially this duke. Especially this wife. "Your Grace." She inclined her head slightly. "Duchess." Margaret looked between them with entirely too much interest. "I believe I shall rescue the refreshments from boredom." She disappeared before either could respond. William watched her leave. Lady Margaret possesses remarkable timing. She possesses remarkable curiosity. That as well. For a moment neither spoke. Music drifted through the room. Couples moved gracefully across the polished floor. William's gaze shifted toward the dancers. "Would you care to walk through the gallery?" The invitation surprised her. They rarely sought each other's company at social events. Public appearances remained cordial but practical. Nothing more. Of course. Together they moved toward a quieter wing of the house. Paintings lined the walls. Candlelight flickered across gilt frames. The noise of the ballroom faded behind them. At last Clara exhaled. "Thank you." William glanced sideways. "For what?" "Rescuing me." One dark eyebrow lifted. From Lady Margaret. From 3 consecutive conversations about my marriage. Understanding appeared immediately. I see. They continued walking. Do people ask often? He said after a moment. Clara considered the question. Only when they are breathing. To her surprise, William laughed. It was brief. Genuine. Entirely unguarded. The sound transformed him. Clara stared before she could stop herself. He noticed. Their eyes met. Something shifted. Tiny. Fleeting. Yet unmistakable. Neither looked away immediately. The moment lasted only seconds. Then footsteps echoed farther down the corridor and the spell broke. William turned toward a painting. Clara focused on the opposite wall. The air suddenly felt different. I apologize, he said quietly. Clara blinked. For what? The questions. The speculation. She studied his profile. You are not responsible for society. No. But I may be responsible for some of its assumptions. The honesty surprised her. Perhaps. His expression hardened slightly. Not from anger. From self-reflection. You have been treated unfairly. Clara looked ahead. That is not unique among women. No. His voice grew thoughtful. But it is still true. Neither spoke again for several moments. The gallery stretched ahead in silence. Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth settle somewhere beneath her ribs. Not because of the apology itself. Because he had noticed. Most people saw only appearances. William had finally begun seeing something else. As they returned toward the ballroom, Clara remained unaware of a pair of watchful eyes observing from across the room. A woman stood near the grand staircase dressed in deep emerald silk. Her gloved hand tightened slightly around her fan. Her expression remained perfectly pleasant. Yet beneath the pleasant smile lay calculation. She watched the Duke of Blackthorn escort his wife back into society's center. She watched the subtle attention in his gaze. She watched the Duchess, who seemed entirely unaware of her own growing influence. Then the woman smiled to herself. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just decided to return to London. And before spring arrived, all of society would know her name again. Lady Victoria Ashcombe. By the time spring settled over London, the whispers had become impossible to ignore. They drifted through ballrooms and drawing rooms. They lingered beside tea tables and beneath crystal chandeliers. They followed Clara into every social gathering with the persistence of a shadow. Most of the comments were never spoken directly to her. That was not how society operated. True cruelty rarely announced itself openly. It hid behind smiles, lowered voices, and carefully chosen phrases that could be denied if challenged. On a bright afternoon in April, Clara sat beside Lady Margaret Penhurst during a charity luncheon held at Devonshire House. More than 100 ladies occupied the enormous drawing room. The scent of fresh roses filled the air. Sunlight streamed through towering windows. Conversations blended into a steady murmur. At first glance the event appeared perfectly pleasant. Clara knew better. She had already noticed 3 women glance toward her before quickly looking away. Another had lowered her voice the moment Clara entered the room. None of this was new. Yet recently the attention felt more focused. More deliberate. You are frowning. Margaret lifted her teacup. That means you are thinking. Clara returned her gaze to the gathering. I was merely observing. Dangerous pastime. Sometimes informative. Margaret followed her line of sight. Across the room, 2 older ladies appeared deeply engaged in conversation. One of them glanced toward Clara at precisely that moment. The other immediately followed. Both looked away when they realized they had been noticed. Margaret sighed. Ah. You see it too. Everyone sees it. Clara remained silent. Margaret lowered her voice. The rumors are becoming more creative. Creative? Last week someone suggested you and the Duke occupy separate floors of Blackthorn House. Clara nearly laughed. That would be difficult. Why? Because Blackthorn House does not have enough floors. Margaret choked on her tea. Clara smiled despite herself. Humor made such things easier to endure. Unfortunately, humor did not stop them. The luncheon concluded shortly after 3 o'clock. As guests began preparing to leave, Clara found herself temporarily separated from Margaret. She stepped into a smaller reception room adjacent to the main hall. The space stood nearly empty. For the first time all afternoon she enjoyed a moment of quiet. Then voices drifted through the partially open doorway. Clara recognized neither speaker immediately. The marriage was always an arrangement. A woman spoke softly. Everyone knows that. Another voice answered. Still, one expects some effort from a husband. A pause followed. Poor Duchess Blackthorn. Clara stood motionless. The conversation continued. She does carry herself well. She has little choice. Imagine becoming a duchess only to discover your husband prefers Parliament to his own wife. Gentle laughter followed. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Not because the words wounded her. They did, though less than they once might have. What exhausted her was the certainty with which strangers discussed private matters they did not understand. She considered leaving immediately. Then another voice joined the conversation. A younger woman this time. I heard His Grace never intended to marry at all. Then why did he? Duty perhaps. The answer came quickly. Certainly not love. More laughter. Clara opened her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She quietly crossed the room and exited through another door before anyone realized she had been nearby. 20 minutes later she sat alone in her carriage traveling back toward Grosvenor Square. Rain threatened beyond the windows. Grey clouds gathered over London. The city seemed wrapped in silver. Clara watched it pass in silence. By the time she arrived at Blackthorn House she had recovered her composure completely. She always did. Self-pity accomplished nothing. Yet as she stepped into the entrance hall, Bennet approached with an unusual expression. Your Grace. Yes, Bennet. His Grace requested that you join him in the library upon your return. Clara blinked. William rarely sent messages through servants unless something required immediate attention. Did he mention the reason? No, Your Grace. Curious, Clara handed over her gloves and crossed the house. The library door stood partially open. She entered quietly. William sat behind a large mahogany desk reviewing correspondence. Several documents lay scattered before him. He looked up as she approached. The luncheon ended early. Clara settled into a nearby chair. How do you know that? Because Parliament ended even earlier. His expression remained calm. I encountered 3 gentlemen discussing your charity event on my way home. Clara smiled faintly. How fortunate for me. William studied her more carefully. You appear tired. The observation caught her off guard. Most people noticed her dress, her manners, her smile. Few noticed fatigue. It was a long afternoon. He leaned back slightly. Was it? Something in his tone suggested the question carried greater meaning. Clara hesitated. Then she understood. You heard something. William's jaw tightened. That alone was answer enough. What did you hear? She asked quietly. For a moment he said nothing. The silence revealed more than words could have. Clara suddenly realized he was angry. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Yet unmistakably. A group of gentlemen discussing my marriage, he said at last. Our marriage. Clara corrected automatically. His gaze met hers. Our marriage. The correction remained between them for a moment. Then he continued. Apparently London has become quite knowledgeable regarding matters occurring inside Blackthorn House. Clara looked down at her hands. Society enjoys inventing stories. Society enjoys speaking without facts. His voice sharpened slightly. Clara stared at him. This reaction surprised her. William Blackthorn was many things. Emotional was not one of them. It does not matter, she said gently. It clearly does. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Clara asked the question she had not intended to ask. Why? The word emerged softly. Yet it changed the atmosphere immediately. William's expression shifted. He looked almost startled by the question. Perhaps because he had no immediate answer. Clara was not certain she understood it herself. Why should gossip trouble him? He had never appeared particularly concerned with public opinion before. Because they are speaking unfairly about you, he said finally. Clara held his gaze. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred unexpectedly inside her chest. It was not love. It was not even hope. It was simply the realization that someone had noticed the injustice. Sometimes that alone mattered. She looked away first. Thank you. The words came quietly. William nodded once. Neither seemed entirely comfortable with the exchange. Fortunately, a knock interrupted the moment. Bennett entered carrying a silver tray. Several calling cards rested upon it. Messages from today's visitors, Your Grace. William accepted the tray. Clara prepared to excuse herself when his expression changed. The shift was subtle but immediate. His eye settled on one particular card. The room grew very still. Clara noticed at once. What is it? For a second he appeared almost reluctant to answer. Then he handed her the card. The elegant script was unmistakably feminine. Lady Victoria Ashcombe. Clara read the name twice. She knew it. Every member of society knew it. Years earlier, Lady Victoria had been among the most celebrated beauties in London. More importantly, she had once been closely connected to the Duke of Blackthorn. Rumours varied regarding the nature of that connection. Yet everyone agreed on one fact. Whatever relationship had existed between them had ended badly. Clara lifted her gaze. William's expression had become unreadable. She has returned to London. Apparently. His voice remained neutral. Too neutral. Clara set the card back onto the tray. Strange. She had never met Lady Victoria. Yet the name alone created an unexpected feeling deep within her stomach. Not jealousy. Certainly not jealousy. Merely curiosity. That was all. Does this surprise you? She asked. Yes. The answer came immediately. Honest. Uncomplicated. Clara nodded. She rose from her chair. Then I shall leave you to your correspondence. William looked as though he might say something else. Instead, he simply inclined his head. Good afternoon, Duchess. Good afternoon, Your Grace. Clara departed the library. The conversation should have ended there. Yet as she climbed the grand staircase, she found herself thinking about the calling card. About William's expression. About the strange silence that had followed. Across London, in a mansion overlooking Hyde Park, Lady Victoria Ashcombe stood before a mirror while her maid adjusted the final ribbon of her gown. The emerald silk complemented her dark hair perfectly. Her reflection smiled back at her. Beautiful. Confident. Calculating. Will the Duke attend tonight's musicale? She asked. Yes, my lady. Victoria's smile deepened. Excellent. She picked up a folded newspaper resting on the vanity. Her eyes moved briefly over an article mentioning the Duchess of Blackthorn's recent charitable work. The smile did not leave her face. If anything, it became more thoughtful. Tell me, she said casually. What does society think of the new Duchess? The maid hesitated. Most people speak highly of her, my lady. Most. Victoria repeated softly. The maid shifted uncomfortably. There are. Stories. Victoria set down the newspaper. Of course there are. She moved toward the window overlooking the city. Evening sunlight painted London gold. Carriages rolled along the streets below. Somewhere within that vast city lived the man she had once believed would always belong to her. Somewhere within that city lived the woman who now carried his name. Victoria's reflection lingered in the glass. Calm. Certain. Patient. Stories, she murmured. How useful. Then she smiled once more. This time there was nothing pleasant about it at all. The first time Clara saw Lady Victoria Ashcombe, she understood immediately why half of London still spoke her name with fascination. The woman entered Lady Fairmont's spring musicale as though she had never left society at all. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Even the musicians seemed momentarily distracted. Victoria moved through the crowd with effortless confidence, dressed in deep emerald silk that complemented her dark hair and striking features. At 30 years old, she possessed the kind of beauty that did not rely upon youth alone. It relied upon certainty. Clara observed her from across the ballroom while accepting a glass of lemonade from a passing servant. Around her, guests quietly exchanged glances. Whispers traveled through the room like wind through leaves. She did not need to hear them to understand their subject. Lady Victoria had returned. More importantly, Lady Victoria had returned while the Duke of Blackthorn was married. This should be interesting. Margaret appeared beside her carrying a fan decorated with painted roses. Clara kept her attention on the ballroom. You say that as though you expect disaster. I attend enough social events to recognize the early signs. Clara smiled faintly. And what signs are those? Margaret lowered her voice. 3 elderly countesses pretending not to stare. 4 ambitious mothers changing their seating plans. 2 gentlemen suddenly discovering an urgent interest in refreshments. Clara glanced around. Unfortunately, Margaret appeared entirely correct. Perhaps London simply enjoys drama. London survives on drama. Margaret studied her friend carefully. How are you feeling? Clara knew exactly what she meant. Curious. Only curious. What else should I be? Margaret considered the answer. Then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Across the room, Victoria laughed at something a gentleman said. The sound carried farther than it should have. Several nearby guests smiled automatically. Clara found herself studying the woman more closely. There was nothing openly improper about her behavior. Nothing rude. Nothing inappropriate. Yet she seemed to occupy every room completely. She drew attention the way candlelight drew moths. Clara looked away first. She disliked analyzing strangers. Particularly strangers whose history she only partly understood. The evening progressed. Music filled the ballroom. Guests circulated through elegant drawing rooms illuminated by hundreds of candles. At first nothing unusual occurred. Then the Duke of Blackthorn arrived. The effect was immediate. Clara noticed it before she even saw him. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused. Several young ladies adjusted their posture. A cluster of gentlemen turned toward the entrance. William crossed the room with his usual calm authority. Tall. Composed. Entirely unaware of the reaction he inspired. Or perhaps entirely accustomed to it. Clara could never decide which. Their eyes met briefly. He inclined his head. She returned the gesture. Then she noticed something else. Victoria had seen him as well. For one fraction of a second, something changed in the woman's expression. It vanished almost immediately. Yet Clara caught it. Recognition. Memory. Perhaps regret. Then the smile returned. Polished. Elegant. Perfect. Margaret followed Clara's gaze. There it is. What? Clara asked. The beginning. Clara sighed. You spend too much time reading novels. And you spend too much time pretending not to notice obvious things. Before Clara could respond, Lady Fairmorn herself approached. Duchess. The hostess beamed warmly. How wonderful to see you. There is someone I would like you to meet. Clara knew resistance would be futile. Within moments she found herself being guided across the ballroom. Unfortunately, she recognized their destination halfway there. Victoria turned smoothly as they approached. Her smile remained flawless. Lady Victoria. Lady Fairmorn said brightly. May I present Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackthorn? For one brief moment the entire room seemed to narrow. Clara extended her hand first. Lady Victoria. Your Grace. Victoria's voice carried the soft musical quality of someone accustomed to admiration. I have wanted to meet you. Clara smiled politely. That is kind. Not kind. True. Victoria's eyes studied her with unsettling precision. London speaks of little else these days. The remark sounded harmless. Yet something about it felt deliberate. Clara recognized the difference immediately. London often has too much free time. Victoria laughed lightly. Several nearby guests joined in despite not hearing the full exchange. How refreshing, she said. Most people pretend not to notice gossip. Pretending rarely changes reality. For a second Victoria appeared genuinely surprised. Then amused. I believe we shall get along very well. Clara doubted that. The conversation continued for several minutes. Everything remained perfectly civil. Perfectly proper. Yet beneath every exchange flowed a subtle current Clara could not entirely define. It was not hostility. Not openly. It felt more like evaluation. As though Victoria were examining a chessboard and deciding where each piece belonged. Eventually another guest claimed Victoria's attention. Clara excused herself. The moment she reached the refreshment table, Margaret appeared. Well. Clara accepted a glass of punch. Well, what? What do you think? Clara considered the question honestly. She is intelligent. Margaret groaned. That is not encouraging. She is charming. Even worse. Clara laughed despite herself. Yet her amusement faded when she noticed William speaking with a group of political acquaintances nearby. Victoria stood only a few feet away. Their paths had not crossed yet. Somehow Clara knew they would. She turned away before it happened. An hour later, she found temporary refuge in the music room. The chamber stood quieter than the ballroom. Only a handful of guests occupied the space. Clara settled near a window overlooking the gardens. The cool evening air drifted through the partially opened glass. For the first time all night she relaxed. Escaping. The voice came from behind her. Clara turned. William stood nearby. Briefly. Understandable. He glanced toward the crowded ballroom beyond the doorway. Lady Fairmorn appears determined to host the entire British Empire. Clara smiled. A noble ambition. For several seconds they stood together in comfortable silence. The ease of it surprised her. Months earlier every conversation had felt carefully measured. Now the silences themselves seemed less awkward. Less guarded. I met Lady Victoria, she said finally. William's expression changed almost imperceptibly. I assumed you would. Clara studied him. Were you surprised to see her? He considered the question. Yes. Do you expect her to remain in London? I do not know. The answer sounded truthful. Clara appreciated that. Neither elaborated further. Some subjects still carried invisible boundaries. Then footsteps approached. A servant entered. Your Grace. He addressed William. Lady Victoria Ashcombe requests a moment of your time. The room became very still. The servant waited respectfully. Clara felt oddly detached, as though watching events from a distance. William's jaw tightened. Only slightly. Yet she noticed. "Thank you," he said. "I will join her shortly." The servant bowed and withdrew. Silence followed. William looked toward the doorway, then back at Clara. "You need not explain," she said quietly. His gaze sharpened. "I was not going to." The answer surprised them both. Clara laughed softly. "Then we understand each other." Something unreadable crossed his face. Then he nodded once. "Apparently we do." Moments later he departed. Clara remained beside the window. She told herself the encounter meant nothing. It probably did mean nothing. Yet she found herself staring into the darkened gardens long after he left. Across the ballroom, Victoria waited exactly where she knew he would find her. Her smile appeared warm when William approached. "Thank you for coming. You requested a conversation." Victoria studied him carefully. "You look well." "And you?" A brief silence followed. Victoria glanced toward the dancers. "It has been years." "Yes. I wondered if you would avoid me." His expression remained calm. "Why would I?" The question carried no bitterness, no longing, no emotion at all. Somehow that seemed to disappoint her. Victoria recovered quickly. Perhaps because people enjoy imagining dramatic histories. People imagine many things. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Including your marriage." There it was. William recognized the shift immediately. "What about it?" Victoria's smile remained flawless. "Only that society seems fascinated." Society should find another hobby. For the first time her smile slipped. "Only briefly." "You defend her." "There is nothing to defend." His tone remained even. "My wife has done nothing wrong." Victoria studied him for several seconds. The answer clearly had not been the one she expected. Across the room, Clara remained unaware of the conversation itself. Yet she noticed something else. She noticed Victoria watching her afterward. Not casually. Not politely. Intently. As though making a decision. The realization sent an unexpected chill through her. Later that evening, as guests prepared to depart, Lady Havisham approached Clara near the entrance hall. The older woman lowered her voice. "You are handling matters admirably." Clara blinked. "I am afraid I do not understand." Lady Havisham offered a sympathetic smile. "Of course you do." Before Clara could respond, the woman moved away. Another guest repeated a similar remark. Then another. By the time Clara entered her carriage, a pattern had become unmistakable. Society had already chosen its narrative. The beautiful woman from the Duke's past had returned. The quiet Duchess stood in her place. Everyone expected conflict. Everyone expected heartbreak. Everyone expected history to repeat itself. Clara leaned back against the carriage seat as London drifted past outside. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely weary. Not because of Victoria. Not because of William. Because strangers seemed determined to transform her life into entertainment. Across town, Victoria stood before her bedroom mirror removing emerald earrings one at a time. Her maid quietly brushed out her hair. "Did you enjoy the evening, my lady?" Victoria smiled at her reflection. "Very much." The Duchess seemed pleasant. The smile deepened. "Yes." Her voice remained thoughtful. "She did." The maid continued brushing. "Will you see her again?" Victoria looked out the window toward the distant lights of London. "Without question." Her reflection held the same beautiful smile. Yet her eyes had become colder. More focused. More determined. And somewhere beyond the city rooftops, hidden beneath the countless rumors already circulating through society, a new one had quietly begun taking shape. It would spread through London within days. By the time Clara heard it herself, the damage would already be done. The rumor arrived before breakfast. By luncheon it had crossed Mayfair. By evening it had reached nearly every drawing room worth mentioning in London. Clara first encountered it 3 days later during a garden party hosted by the Countess of Easton. The afternoon sun warmed the sprawling lawns. White tents fluttered gently in the breeze. Guests wandered between flower displays while a small orchestra performed beneath a canopy of roses. Everything appeared charming. Everything appeared civilized. Clara had long ago learned those appearances could be misleading. She was speaking with 2 elderly ladies about a charity hospital when she noticed an unusual silence spread across a nearby group. Heads turned. Fans paused midair. Several women exchanged glances. Clara followed their attention. Lady Victoria Ashcombe had just arrived. Dressed in pale blue silk, she seemed almost angelic beneath the afternoon sunlight. The effect was undoubtedly intentional. Margaret appeared at Clara's side moments later. Her expression alone was enough warning. "Do not tell me," Clara said quietly. "I was hoping to postpone the inevitable." Margaret accepted a glass of lemonade from a servant. "Then I regret to inform you that London has once again disappointed us both." Clara sighed. "What is it this time?" "Apparently." Margaret lowered her voice. "Lady Victoria sacrificed her own happiness years ago because she loved the Duke too much to burden him with her family's difficulties." Clara stared at her. "That does not even make sense." "No." Margaret agreed. "Which means society will adore it." Clara almost laughed. Almost. Instead she looked toward Victoria, who appeared entirely occupied in conversation with the hostess. "And people believe this?" "People believe whatever allows them to feel emotionally invested in lives that are not their own." Margaret took a sip of lemonade. "The truly impressive part is how quickly the story evolved. There is more." "Naturally." Margaret's tone grew drier. "You are now widely considered the practical solution he married after losing the woman he truly wanted." For several seconds Clara simply stood there. Not because the words shocked her. Because they explained certain conversations she had experienced recently. Certain looks. Certain pauses. Certain carefully disguised sympathies. The pieces suddenly fit together. "Remarkable," she said. "Is it not?" Margaret replied. "The creativity alone deserves recognition." Clara forced a smile. Then turned back toward her companions as though nothing had happened. She spent the next hour performing exactly as society expected. She smiled. She conversed. She complimented flower arrangements. She discussed charitable initiatives. No one observing her would have guessed anything was wrong. Yet the rumor followed her everywhere. She saw it reflected in people's eyes. Some pitied her. Some judged her. Others appeared almost excited. By the time she returned home that evening, exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind created by constantly being observed. Constantly interpreted. Constantly misunderstood. Blackthorn House stood quiet when she arrived. The servants moved efficiently through the corridors. Dinner would not be served for another hour. Clara climbed the grand staircase intending to spend the remaining time alone. Halfway up she paused. Voices drifted from the drawing room below. Several maids were arranging flowers for the evening meal. They had not noticed her. Clara normally would have continued upstairs. Then she heard her own name. "It is unfair," one young maid said softly. "Her Grace has always been kind." "People enjoy stories," another replied. "That does not make them true." Clara remained perfectly still. The first maid sighed. "I hope she never hears what they are saying." A strange feeling tightened somewhere behind Clara's ribs. Not pain. Not quite. Something quieter. She moved away before hearing more. The kindness of servants who believed she could not hear them affected her more than society's cruelty. An hour later she sat across from William in the formal dining room. Candlelight flickered between them. Crystal glasses reflected golden light across the white linen tablecloth. Their dinners together had gradually become less awkward over recent months. Conversation no longer felt like a duty. Sometimes it even felt natural. Tonight proved an exception. Clara pushed food around her plate with little appetite. William noticed almost immediately. He noticed more things lately. You are unusually quiet. Clara looked up. Am I? Yes. She considered offering a polite dismissal. Instead she asked, have you heard the latest version? Understanding appeared at once. William set down his fork. Which version? The one where Lady Victoria nobly sacrifices herself while I conveniently inherit the reward. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then William's expression hardened. Clara had rarely seen that look directed toward anything except political opponents. Who told you? No one needed to, she replied. The entire city appears eager to share it. William's jaw tightened. It is nonsense. I know. Then why does it upset you? The question was reasonable. Unfortunately, it struck too close to the truth. Clara lowered her gaze briefly. Because people seem disappointed that I exist. The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence immediately followed. Clara regretted the admission at once. She never complained. She never indulged self-pity. Yet the statement remained hanging between them. Honest. Vulnerable. Impossible to retract. William stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Something she could not immediately identify. Clara. The use of her name startled her. He rarely used it. She looked up. Anyone who is disappointed by your existence is a fool. The room became very quiet. Clara forgot the rumor. Forgot the dinner. Forgot everything except the sincerity in his voice. William appeared equally surprised by his own words. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Then the moment passed. A servant entered carrying the next course. Conversation resumed. Yet something fundamental had changed. Later that night Clara sat alone in her private sitting room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A fire burned low in the hearth. The house had grown quiet. She held a book open upon her lap without reading a single page. Her thoughts remained fixed on dinner. On one sentence. Anyone who is disappointed by your existence is a fool. Such a simple statement. Yet no one had ever said anything quite like it before. Clara closed the book. Suddenly she felt absurdly tired. Not from the rumor. Not from society. From carrying everything alone. She crossed toward the window. Rain streaked the glass. London beyond appeared blurred and distant. Before she fully understood what was happening, tears filled her eyes. She turned away immediately. Annoyed with herself. Embarrassed by herself. She almost never cried. Certainly not over gossip. Yet tonight felt different. Perhaps because the rumor had touched an old wound she rarely acknowledged. The fear of being tolerated rather than chosen. Valued for usefulness rather than affection. Respected yet never truly wanted. One tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. Clara pressed a hand against her eyes and laughed softly at her own foolishness. Pull yourself together, she whispered. Unfortunately, the command proved ineffective. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Clara froze. Your Grace? Bennet's voice came from the hallway. A message has arrived. Relief washed through her. She quickly dried her eyes. One moment. By the time she opened the door, her composure had largely returned. Bennet handed her a sealed envelope. "From your brother, Your Grace." Clara thanked him and closed the door again. The letter immediately distracted her attention. She settled beside the fire and broke the seal. Several pages unfolded. As she read, her expression gradually changed. Concern replaced exhaustion. Then worry replaced concern. Her younger brother, Thomas Whitmore, wrote with unusual urgency. Financial difficulties had emerged regarding one of the family properties in Hampshire. Nothing disastrous yet, but serious enough to require attention. Clara reread the letter twice. Her stomach tightened. Not because she feared poverty. She had known financial uncertainty before. Because Thomas clearly attempted to minimize the situation. That meant it was worse than he admitted. Across the hall, William sat alone in his study reviewing documents from Parliament. The clock approached midnight. Normally he would have retired already. Instead he found himself staring at the same page for nearly 10 minutes without absorbing a single word. His thoughts kept returning to dinner. To Clara's expression when she spoke of the rumors. To the quiet resignation beneath her voice. He disliked it. More accurately, he disliked the fact that he had become aware of it. Awareness created responsibility. Responsibility demanded action. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Bennet appeared. "My apologies, Your Grace." William looked up. "What is it?" The butler hesitated. "Her Grace received troubling news from her family this evening." William straightened immediately. "Troubling?" "A letter arrived shortly before 10 o'clock. Bennet chose his words carefully. "She appeared distressed." William stared at him. "Distressed?" Bennet nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." The butler departed moments later. Yet William remained motionless behind his desk. Distressed. The word echoed strangely in his thoughts. Clara rarely appeared distressed. She remained composed under circumstances that unsettled most people. If something had shaken her, then it mattered. After several minutes he rose and crossed toward the study window. Rain continued falling beyond the glass. Somewhere in the house Clara sat alone with whatever burden her family had sent her. For reasons he did not entirely understand, the realization bothered him. More than that, it made him want to do something about it. Down the corridor, Clara folded her brother's letter and placed it carefully inside the locked ledger she never allowed anyone to see. The same ledger she had hidden since arriving at Blackthorn House. For several seconds her hand rested upon the cover. Then she quietly locked it again. Outside, the rain continued through the night. Neither Clara nor William slept particularly well. And somewhere across London, Lady Victoria Ashcombe received news that made her smile. The rumors were working exactly as intended. She simply did not realize that for the first time since her return, the gossip was beginning to produce consequences she had never anticipated. Not for Clara. For William. The invitation arrived on cream-colored stationery embossed with the crest of the Earl and Countess of Ashbury. Under ordinary circumstances, Clara might have welcomed the distraction. The Ashbury Spring Gala was one of the most anticipated social events of the season. Nearly every prominent family in London would attend. Musicians had been brought from Bath. Floral arrangements were rumored to cost more than some country estates earned in a year. Under ordinary circumstances, it would have been pleasant. Unfortunately, nothing about recent weeks felt ordinary. Clara folded the invitation and placed it atop her writing desk. Outside her sitting room window, late spring sunlight spilled across Grosvenor Square. The city seemed brighter than it had in months. Yet the letter from Thomas remained tucked safely inside her locked ledger. The family difficulties in Hampshire had not disappeared. If anything, additional correspondence suggested matters were becoming increasingly complicated. She had spent days writing replies, balancing concerns, and searching for solutions without alarming anyone. Most importantly, she had ensured William remained unaware of the details. The problems belonged to the Whitmore family. They did not belong to the Duke of Blackthorn. At least that was what she kept telling herself. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Enter. Margaret swept into the room carrying enough enthusiasm for 3 people. Good. You are dressed. Clara glanced down at her pale lavender gown. That is generally how I spend my afternoons. Margaret ignored the remark. Excellent. Then you cannot escape. Escape what? The Ashbury Gala. Clara sighed immediately. I was hoping illness might develop. You look annoyingly healthy. Margaret settled into a chair without invitation. Besides, absence would only encourage gossip. Attendance encourages gossip. True. Margaret admitted. But at least attendance allows retaliation through superior posture. Clara laughed despite herself. By evening, Blackthorn House buzzed with activity. Footmen prepared carriages. Servants attended final details. Candlelight illuminated the grand entrance hall as guests across London prepared for the same destination. Clara descended the staircase shortly before 8 o'clock. The moment she reached the bottom step, she stopped. William stood near the entrance speaking quietly with Bennet. Dressed in formal evening attire, he looked every inch the powerful Duke society expected. Yet something about him appeared different tonight. Perhaps it was merely her imagination. Perhaps not. He looked up as she approached. For one brief moment, his attention lingered. Not long enough to attract notice. Long enough for her to notice. You look well, he said. Clara blinked. Compliments from William remained rare enough to qualify as significant events. Thank you, she replied. So do you. Something almost amused flickered across his face. Then Bennet announced the carriage was ready. The journey to Ashbury House passed quietly. Outside, London glowed beneath hundreds of gas lamps. Elegant carriages crowded the streets. The social season stood in full bloom. When they arrived, the scale of the event exceeded even Margaret's dramatic descriptions. Crystal chandeliers illuminated enormous ballrooms. Fresh flowers decorated every available surface. Music drifted through the mansion like a living thing. Guests filled the rooms from wall to wall. Clara quickly found herself surrounded by conversations. Charity committees. Political discussions. Family updates. Endless social obligations. She handled them all with practiced grace. Yet beneath the surface she sensed something else. Attention. More than usual. More focused. More curious. The rumors had clearly not faded. If anything, they had evolved. Your Grace. Lady Havisham appeared beside her. How lovely to see you. Clara smiled politely. Likewise. The older woman hesitated. I understand Lady Victoria is attending this evening. There it was. Direct and unavoidable. Clara maintained her composure. Many people are attending this evening. Of course. Lady Havisham immediately looked embarrassed. Forgive me. That was inappropriate. Clara spared her further discomfort by changing the subject. Yet the exchange repeated itself throughout the evening. Different faces. Different wording. Same implication. By 10 o'clock, she felt exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. She escaped toward a quieter gallery overlooking the gardens. The cool night air filtering through open windows offered welcome relief. For several precious minutes she stood alone. Then footsteps approached. Clara did not need to turn around. She recognized the voice immediately. Hiding again? William asked. Recovering, she corrected. He joined her near the window. Beyond the glass, lanterns illuminated winding garden paths. Music drifted faintly from distant ballrooms. Difficult evening, he asked. Clara considered denying it. Then decided honesty required less energy. Somewhat. William's expression darkened slightly. The rumors. It was not a question. Clara nodded. Silence settled between them. Yet unlike previous months, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt shared. I am beginning to understand something, Clara said after a moment. What? She watched the lanterns flicker outside. People prefer a tragic story. William looked at her. Meaning? The idea that you secretly belong to someone else is more interesting than the reality. A faint crease appeared between his brows. And what reality is that? The question surprised her. More importantly, it surprised him. Clara could tell immediately. Neither seemed entirely certain how to answer. Before either could speak, a familiar voice interrupted. There you are. Lady Victoria Ashcombe approached with effortless elegance. Emerald silk shimmered beneath the candlelight. Her smile appeared warm. Almost affectionate. I have been searching for both of you. Clara instantly recognized several nearby guests paying suspiciously close attention. They were no longer merely observing. They were waiting. Victoria stopped beside them. Your Grace. She inclined her head toward Clara. Duchess. Clara returned the greeting politely. Victoria turned toward William. The Earl of Westbrook was hoping to discuss a charitable initiative with us. I promised I would introduce you. The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. That was precisely the problem. William's expression remained unreadable. I see. Victoria smiled. Will you join me? Several nearby conversations had grown noticeably quieter. Clara saw it happen. Others saw it happen too. Society smelled drama. Everyone wanted a front row seat. For one uncomfortable moment, nobody moved. Then William did something entirely unexpected. No. Victoria blinked. The room seemed to pause around them. No, she repeated. William's voice remained calm. I am speaking with my wife. Clara stared at him. So did Victoria. So did nearly everyone within hearing distance. The statement itself was simple. The implications were not. Victoria recovered first. Of course, she said smoothly. I did not mean to interrupt. Yet something colder flickered behind her smile. Something frustrated. She turned gracefully and walked away. The moment she disappeared, conversations resumed throughout the gallery. Only now they sounded different. Clara could practically feel the surprise spreading through the room. William appeared entirely unaware of the impact. Or perhaps entirely unconcerned by it. You did not have to do that. Clara said quietly. He looked at her. Do what? That. For several seconds he seemed genuinely confused. Then understanding dawned. Yes, he said simply. I did. Their eyes met. Something shifted. Tiny but undeniable. Before either could examine it further, Margaret appeared from nowhere. Did I miss something? She asked. Clara almost laughed. Apparently. Margaret studied both of them suspiciously. Then her gaze drifted toward the ballroom where Victoria stood speaking with a group of admirers. Interesting, she murmured. Unfortunately, the evening was not finished. An hour later, the gala reached its peak. Hundreds of guests crowded the main ballroom while musicians performed a lively waltz. Clara stood near the refreshment table discussing charitable fundraising with Lady Fairmorn when she heard laughter nearby. Not ordinary laughter. The sharp kind. The deliberate kind. She glanced toward the source. A group of young aristocratic women stood several feet away. One lowered her voice, though not quite enough. Well, if one cannot marry for love, a dukedom is certainly a respectable consolation prize. More laughter followed. The words struck harder than Clara expected. Not because they were particularly original. Because they arrived after months of accumulated whispers. Months of speculation. Months of being measured against a story she had never chosen. She looked away immediately, determined to ignore it. Unfortunately, another voice joined in. Perhaps practicality is the modern fashion. Then Lady Victoria must be terribly unfashionable. More laughter. Clara felt warmth rise into her cheeks. Around her, a few guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Nobody intervened. Nobody ever intervened. She drew a slow breath, lifted her chin, prepared to walk away. Then a deep voice cut through the conversation. How fortunate. The laughter stopped instantly. William stood only a few feet away. Nobody seemed to know how long he had been there. His expression remained perfectly calm. That somehow made him more intimidating. Your Grace, one of the women stammered. William's gaze moved across the group. How fortunate that my wife possesses enough grace to ignore comments that reveal more about the speaker than the subject. Silence followed. Complete silence. The women looked mortified. Nearby guests stared openly. Clara forgot how to breathe. William's attention shifted toward her. Duchess. His voice softened slightly. Would you care for some air? Clara nodded before trusting herself to speak. Moments later they stepped onto a terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens. Cool night air surrounded them. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Clara finally managed, you truly did not need to do that. William rested one hand against the stone railing. Yes, he said again. I did. The answer came without hesitation this time. Clara looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the Duke of Blackthorn. Not the powerful political figure. Not the distant husband she had married. Simply William. Something warm and complicated settled inside her chest. Dangerous territory. She immediately looked away. Unfortunately, the world chose that exact moment to tilt. The lights blurred unexpectedly. The terrace seemed farther away than it had seconds earlier. Clara blinked. Once. Twice. The sensation only worsened. Clara. William's voice sounded suddenly closer. She attempted a reassuring smile. I am fine. Unfortunately, even she heard how unconvincing it sounded. The past several weeks had taken more from her than she realized. Sleepless nights. Family worries. Constant social pressure. Endless obligations. Her body had apparently reached its limit before she had. The terrace swayed gently beneath her feet. You are not fine, William said sharply. Clara opened her mouth to argue. The world disappeared before she could. The last thing she felt was a pair of steady hands catching her before she fell. The last thing she heard was William saying her name with a fear she had never heard in his voice before. And across the ballroom, Lady Victoria Ashcombe watched the entire scene unfold with growing disbelief. Because for the first time since her return to London, she was beginning to suspect she had misunderstood something important. Something very important indeed. Clara awakened to the scent of lavender and the distant crackle of a fireplace. For several moments she remained completely still, uncertain where she was. The ceiling above her looked familiar. The pale blue curtains framing the windows looked familiar. Then memory returned all at once. The gala. The terrace. The dizziness. William's voice. Her eyes opened fully. She was in her room at Blackthorn House. Relief arrived first. Embarrassment followed immediately afterward. A soft rustle drew her attention toward the nearby chair. William sat beside the window. He still wore his evening clothes. The coat had been removed and draped across the back of a chair, but otherwise he appeared exactly as he had at the gala. His posture remained straight. Alert. Awake. Clara glanced toward the mantel clock. Nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. You are awake. His voice broke the silence. Clara attempted to sit up. The room remained steady this time. Apparently. William stood immediately. Do not move too quickly. She blinked. I fainted. I did not survive a shipwreck. To her surprise, he did not smile. If anything, his expression tightened further. The physician said exhaustion. Clara looked away. That sounds dramatic. It sounds preventable. The answer came faster than expected. Clara studied him more carefully. Something felt different. His composure remained intact. Yet tension radiated beneath it. The physician's leather bag sat near the door. Several empty medicine bottles rested on a nearby table. The evidence suddenly became clear. William had been worried. The realization unsettled her more than the fainting itself. You stayed? She asked quietly. His gaze met hers. Of course. The answer arrived without hesitation. Clara found herself unexpectedly speechless. William crossed toward the fireplace. The physician believes you have been sleeping poorly. Physicians believe many things. He also believes stress contributed. Clara looked toward the window. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. He is probably correct. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Merely honest. Eventually William spoke again. What happened? Clara knew exactly what he meant. Not the fainting. The cause. She considered offering a simple explanation. Then dismissed the idea. I have been worried about my family, she admitted. William remained quiet. Waiting. Clara appreciated that. Too many people interrupted confessions before they finished. My brother wrote several weeks ago, she continued. There are financial difficulties involving one of our properties in Hampshire. William's expression sharpened. How serious? Clara hesitated. More serious than Thomas wishes me to believe. And you have been carrying this alone. It was not a question. Clara lowered her gaze. They are my family's problems. You are my wife. The words landed heavily between them. Not because of the title itself. Because of the conviction behind it. Clara looked up slowly. William's expression remained calm. Yet something new existed there. Something protective. Something firm. That does not make their difficulties your responsibility, she said softly. Perhaps not. His voice remained steady. But it does make your distress my concern. For several seconds neither spoke. Clara could not remember the last time someone had said something so simple and meant it so completely. She looked away first. The emotion rising unexpectedly in her chest felt far too dangerous. By morning the physician declared her fit enough to leave bed, though he strongly recommended rest. Clara promptly ignored half the advice and attempted to resume her normal schedule. William noticed immediately. No, he said from across the breakfast table. Clara blinked. No. You are not reviewing household accounts today. William. No. She stared at him. You realize I am not 12 years old. I realize you nearly collapsed yesterday. Clara opened her mouth. Closed it again. Across the room, Bennett very wisely concentrated on pouring tea while pretending complete deafness. William calmly buttered a piece of toast. The account will survive one day without you. The staff expects guidance. The staff expects you to remain conscious. Clara hated how reasonable that sounded. By late afternoon she reluctantly found herself sitting in the conservatory with a novel she had not actually read for nearly 20 minutes. Sunlight filtered through glass walls. Exotic flowers filled the air with subtle fragrance. It should have been relaxing. Instead her thoughts remained fixed on Hampshire. On Thomas. On problems she could not solve from London. Footsteps approached. Clara looked up. William entered carrying several documents. You are supposed to be resting, she informed him. I am. He settled into a nearby chair. Parliament is resting with me. Clara eyed the papers. A highly suspicious definition. To her surprise, William actually smiled. Not a fleeting almost smile. A real one. Brief but unmistakable. The sight caught her off guard. There it is, she said before thinking. There what is? Nothing. Clara immediately looked back at her book. Unfortunately, she was not quick enough. William's curiosity awakened instantly. What? She sighed. You smiled. I am capable of smiling. Apparently. His expression shifted toward amusement again. You sound surprised. I am surprised. For the first time in days, genuine laughter escaped her. The sound lingered in the conservatory long after it faded. Neither noticed the elderly gardener outside smiling quietly to himself through the glass. 3 days later, Clara finally convinced everyone she had recovered completely. The physician approved. Bennett approved. Even William reluctantly approved. Life gradually returned to normal. At least on the surface. Underneath, something had changed. The distance between them no longer felt quite as wide. Conversations came more naturally. Silences felt easier. Shared moments accumulated without either consciously encouraging them. Then came the carriage accident. The morning began beautifully. Clear skies stretched across the countryside as Clara travelled toward a charitable school several miles outside London. Margaret accompanied her. They spent most of the journey discussing books and debating whether society could survive without gossip. Margaret argued no. Clara argued society would improve dramatically. Neither convinced the other. The school visit concluded successfully. Children proudly displayed their lessons. Teachers discussed future improvements. Donations were arranged. Everything proceeded exactly as planned. Until the return journey. The first sign of trouble came when the carriage suddenly lurched. Not violently. Just enough to interrupt conversation. Margaret frowned. That felt strange. Clara glanced toward the window. The road appeared normal. Rolling countryside stretched beneath the afternoon sun. Perhaps a rut, she suggested. Then came another jolt. Stronger this time. The carriage tilted briefly before correcting itself. Both women exchanged looks. Concern replaced amusement. Outside, voices called between the driver and footman. The horses sounded restless. Then everything happened very quickly. A loud crack echoed from somewhere beneath the carriage. The vehicle jerked sharply to one side. Margaret grabbed the seat. Clara reached instinctively toward the opposite wall. The driver shouted. The horses surged forward. The carriage bounced violently across uneven ground. For one terrifying moment, control vanished completely. Then, almost as suddenly, everything stopped. Silence followed. Thick. Strange. Unnatural. Clara realized she was gripping the seat so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Across from her, Margaret appeared equally shaken. Are you hurt? Clara asked immediately. Margaret shook her head. You? No. The carriage door opened. One of the footmen appeared. Pale but unharmed. Your Graces, he said breathlessly. The wheel assembly failed. The horses are secure. Everyone is safe. Relief flooded the carriage. Margaret exhaled loudly. Clara leaned back against the seat. Her heart continued racing. Yet nobody had been injured. That mattered most. Within an hour a replacement carriage arrived from a nearby estate. By evening they returned safely to Blackthorn House. Clara expected relief. Instead she walked directly into something entirely different. William met her in the entrance hall before she reached the staircase. He looked furious. Not at her. Furious in general. Which somehow felt worse. What happened? The question arrived immediately. Clara blinked. "Good evening to you as well." Clara. She had never heard her name sound quite like that. Sharp. Tight. Almost desperate. Clara softened instantly. The wheel assembly broke. No one was injured. William stared at her. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he closed his eyes briefly, as though absorbing the information required effort. "I received word 2 hours ago," he said quietly. Understanding arrived all at once. He had spent 2 hours believing something terrible might have happened. Clara's chest tightened unexpectedly. "William." His gaze returned to hers. The anger had vanished. What remained looked suspiciously like fear. Real fear. The kind impossible to fake. "You could have been hurt." The words emerged low and rough. Clara forgot every prepared response. Forgot every careful boundary. Because in that moment she finally understood something. William Blackthorne was no longer protecting her out of duty. Duty did not sound like this. Duty did not wait beside windows for news. Duty did not stay awake all night beside sickbeds. Duty did not look at someone as though the possibility of losing them had become unbearable. Neither spoke. The grand entrance hall seemed strangely empty around them. Then William took a slow breath. His expression hardened into determination. "I want the carriage inspected." "It already has been." "Again?" Clara stared. "Again?" "I do not like coincidences." The statement immediately captured her attention. "What are you saying?" William looked toward the doorway where the damaged carriage would arrive later for examination. His jaw tightened. "I am saying that a properly maintained Blackthorne carriage should not fail on a clear afternoon." Silence settled between them. Cold and uneasy. Clara felt the first flicker of genuine concern. Not about the accident itself. About what might be hidden behind it. William's gaze remained fixed on the darkening evening beyond the open doors. "Perhaps it was nothing," Clara said softly. Perhaps, he agreed. Yet his expression suggested otherwise. And somewhere beyond London, far from Blackthorne House, a man accepted a small payment and convinced himself he had done nothing particularly wrong. He never imagined anyone would begin asking questions. He never imagined the Duke of Blackthorne would refuse to let the matter disappear. 3 days after the carriage accident, William Blackthorne stopped believing in coincidence. The damaged carriage stood inside one of the estate's maintenance buildings on the edge of London. Morning sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating dust particles drifting through the air. Several trusted employees waited nearby while an older engineer carefully examined the broken wheel assembly for a third time. William stood silently beside the workbench. His expression remained calm. The men surrounding him knew better than to mistake that calm for ease. The engineer finally straightened. "Your Grace." William looked up. "Well?" The older man hesitated. The damage did not occur naturally. Silence settled over the building. Even the distant sounds of horses seemed to fade. William's gaze hardened. "Explain." The engineer picked up a damaged metal component. This fastening pin was deliberately weakened. He held it toward the light. It would have appeared secure during a normal inspection. However, after enough miles on rough roads, failure became inevitable. One of the stable managers swore quietly beneath his breath. William did not react. Outwardly, nothing changed at all. Inwardly, something cold settled into place. "You are certain?" he asked. "Completely certain, Your Grace." The engineer's voice carried absolute confidence. This was not an accident. William stared at the damaged piece of metal. A dozen possibilities immediately formed in his mind. None of them were acceptable. By the time he returned to Blackthorne House, his decision had already been made. Someone had tampered with a carriage carrying his wife. He intended to discover who. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she saw him that afternoon. They sat together in a library reviewing plans for an upcoming charity event. At least that had been the original intention. William had not turned a single page in nearly 15 minutes. His attention remained fixed elsewhere. "You found something," she said quietly. His gaze lifted immediately. For a second he appeared almost surprised she had noticed. Then again, she usually noticed. "Yes." Clara set down her pen. "The carriage?" William nodded once. "The damage was intentional." The words landed heavily. Clara felt her pulse quicken despite her efforts to remain calm. Intentional? Someone weakened part of the wheel assembly before the journey. For several seconds she simply stared at him. The possibility had existed since the night of the accident. Hearing it confirmed felt entirely different. "Why?" she whispered. William's jaw tightened. "That is what I intend to discover." Silence followed. Clara stared toward the library window. Beyond the glass, London continued its ordinary routines. Carriages rolled past. Pedestrians crossed streets. The world looked exactly the same. Yet suddenly it did not feel the same at all. Someone had deliberately endangered that carriage. Someone had known she would be inside. The realization sent a chill through her. "William." He looked at her immediately. "What?" Clara hesitated. "Please be careful." Something changed in his expression. Briefly. Subtly. Yet she saw it. "You are worried about me investigating," he said. It was not a question. Clara looked away. "I would prefer not to add another problem to the list." The corner of his mouth softened slightly. "Not amusement. Something warmer. I am not planning to duel a criminal organization." Clara exhaled despite herself. "That is reassuring." "Good." The conversation ended there. At least outwardly. Internally, neither stopped thinking about it. Later that evening Clara sat alone in her private sitting room. The locked ledger rested on the desk beside her. Candlelight flickered across its worn cover. She had not opened it in several days. Yet tonight her attention kept returning to it. The carriage. The rumors. Thomas's letters. Everything felt increasingly connected to worries she could no longer ignore. Eventually she unlocked the ledger and removed several folded papers. Not financial records. Personal documents. Letters. Notes. Old agreements. Pieces of a history she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Her fingers lingered over one particular page. Then a knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly closed the ledger. "Enter." To her surprise, William stepped inside. "I hope I am not interrupting." Clara looked toward the locked book. "Not particularly." William noticed the movement. His gaze briefly settled on the ledger. Then moved away. He had always respected boundaries. One of the many reasons she trusted him. "I received a visitor today," he said. Clara gestured toward a nearby chair. "Who?" William sat down. "Your brother." Clara froze. "Thomas is in London. He arrived this morning." Concern immediately replaced surprise. "Is something wrong?" William studied her carefully. "That depends." Clara's stomach tightened. "William." He leaned forward slightly. "Why did your brother thank me for saving the Whitmore family?" Silence filled the room. Complete. Absolute. Clara felt her heart stop for one impossible second. Then begin beating far too quickly. William's gaze never left her face. Suddenly she understood. Thomas had said something. Something he was never supposed to say. "Clara." William's voice softened. "What have I not been told?" She looked toward the fire. Toward the window. Anywhere except at him. For over a year she had kept the truth carefully hidden. Not because she enjoyed secrets. Because the secret had never belonged entirely to her. Yet now the moment she had spent months avoiding stood directly before her. "You were never supposed to know," she said quietly. William remained silent. Waiting. Giving her space. Clara appreciated that almost as much as she resented it. Because patience left fewer places to hide. Finally she looked up. "Do you remember the week before our engagement was announced?" William frowned slightly. "Yes. You were having difficulties with the Northern Railway investment." Recognition flickered immediately. Very few people knew about that. "My father knew." William stared at her. Slowly, understanding began assembling itself piece by piece. "Clara." She lowered her gaze. The losses threatened several estate obligations. If the situation became public, Parliament would have questioned your financial position. Investors would have panicked. William did not speak. He simply listened. "My father learned of it through business connections." Clara continued. "He also knew our family possessed assets capable of stabilizing the situation." The room felt very still. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere deeper within the house, a clock chimed the hour. Clara barely heard it. The marriage negotiations began shortly afterward. She finished. William's expression had become completely unreadable. "You knew?" Clara nodded. "Yes." "Before the proposal?" "Yes." He stared at her. "And you agreed anyway?" The words carried no accusation. Only disbelief. Clara folded her hands tightly in her lap. "Both families benefited." "That is not what I asked." Silence followed. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Clara answered honestly. "I agreed because it was the right thing to do." William looked away first. His gaze settled on the fire. For several moments he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Rougher somehow. "You saved Blackthorn Estate." Clara immediately shook her head. "No." "Yes." His eyes returned to hers. "You did." The certainty in his voice unsettled her. "Many people contributed." "You were 23 years old." William said quietly. "You could have married anyone." Clara attempted a smile. "That seems optimistic." He ignored the remark completely. "How many offers did you decline?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated. William noticed. Of course he noticed. "How many?" he repeated. "Several." His expression darkened further. "Several." Clara sighed. 3 serious proposals." William stared at her. She almost wished he would stop looking at her like that. As though each answer somehow made things worse. One was a viscount, she admitted. Another owned substantial property in Kent. The third. She stopped. "The third?" William asked quietly. Clara laughed softly without humor. "The third genuinely cared for me." Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The painful kind. William looked toward the floor. Then toward the fire. Then back at her. The realization slowly settled between them. Clara had not married him because she expected happiness. She had not married him because she dreamed of becoming a duchess. She had married him knowing exactly what awaited her. Knowing he could never love her. Knowing she would likely spend years standing beside a man whose heart belonged elsewhere. She had done it anyway. To protect both families. To prevent scandal. To solve problems she had not created. William felt something inside him shift. Something painful. Something humbling. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked. Clara looked genuinely surprised. What would have been the point? The answer struck harder than any accusation could have. William stared at her. Suddenly he saw countless moments differently. The wedding night. Her calm acceptance. Her refusal to demand affection. Her complete lack of bitterness. It had never been indifference. It had been sacrifice. Quiet. Uncomplaining. Extraordinary sacrifice. He rose abruptly and crossed toward the window. Clara watched him with growing concern. William. He could not look at her immediately. Because for the first time since their marriage, he felt something dangerously close to shame. She had entered their marriage carrying more courage than he ever realized. And what had he offered her in return? Distance. Formality. A promise that he would never love her. The memory felt unbearable now. I was wrong, he said quietly. Clara blinked. About what? William turned toward her. His grey eyes held an intensity she had never seen before. About many things. Neither spoke after that. Words suddenly felt insufficient. The truth had changed too much. Later that night, after Clara retired, William remained alone in the library. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat untouched beside him. Documents covered the desk. Yet he no longer saw them. His thoughts remained fixed on one woman. One conversation. One revelation. Clara Whitmore had given up more than he ever knew. And she had never once asked for recognition. Never once asked for gratitude. Never once asked for love. The realization hurt. Because for the first time, William found himself wishing desperately that he had been a better husband. Across London, Lady Victoria Ashcombe sat in a drawing-room illuminated by candlelight while a nervous gentleman delivered information she had paid generously to obtain. Her expression remained composed throughout the report. Until one particular detail emerged. The Duke personally inspected the carriage investigation. Victoria asked. Yes, my lady. The gentleman nodded. And according to several sources, he has become extremely protective of the Duchess. Silence followed. Victoria slowly set down her teacup. For the first time in months, uncertainty entered her expression. Because the story she had carefully constructed depended upon one assumption. The assumption that William Blackthorne remained emotionally distant from his wife. Tonight, for the first time, she began to fear that assumption might be wrong. Very wrong indeed. The following week, London began changing its mind. Not completely. Society rarely abandoned a favorite story overnight. Yet subtle shifts appeared. Small changes. Quiet observations. The kind that eventually became new narratives. Clara noticed the difference first at a charity committee meeting held at the home of Lady Fairmorn. 6 weeks earlier, nearly every conversation had contained some variation of sympathy. Polite concern. Delicate assumptions regarding her marriage. Now those same women seemed uncertain. Their confidence had vanished. In its place stood curiosity. The Duke attended the hospital fundraiser personally, one lady asked over tea. Yes. Clara answered. How unusual, another remarked. Clara merely smiled. She did not mention that William had spent nearly 3 hours speaking with administrators, reviewing accounts, and discussing future improvements. Nor did she mention that he had quietly doubled the planned donation before leaving. Some things belonged to him. Not society. Across the room, Lady Havisham lowered her teacup. I heard His Grace cancelled a parliamentary dinner to accompany you to the school opening in Surrey. Clara blinked. Where did you hear that? London. Lady Havisham replied. London hears everything. Several women laughed softly. Yet Clara noticed something important. Nobody mentioned Lady Victoria. Nobody compared anyone. For the first time in months, she was being discussed as herself. Not as a replacement in someone else's story. The realization felt surprisingly pleasant. That afternoon she returned to Blackthorne House carrying a lighter mood than usual. Unfortunately, William was nowhere to be found. According to Bennet, the Duke had departed shortly after breakfast and had not yet returned. That alone was not unusual. What was unusual was the expression on Bennet's face when he delivered the information. The butler appeared almost pleased. Clara recognized it immediately. The entire household had become invested in their marriage. It was both touching and deeply embarrassing. By evening, William finally returned. Clara found him in the library reviewing documents beside a fire that had burned low. Several folders covered the desk. His expression looked focused. Intent. Dangerous. "You found something," she said. He looked up immediately. That still happened. No matter how occupied he appeared, he always noticed her. "Yes." Clara crossed toward the desk. "The carriage investigation?" William nodded. "Partly." She sat opposite him. "And?" He studied her for several seconds, as though deciding how much to reveal. Then he slid a document across the desk. Clara read it carefully. Her expression gradually changed. This man received money. William leaned back. 3 days before the carriage departed. Clara continued reading. The stable worker in question had recently resigned and left London without explanation. Several witnesses confirmed unusual meetings with an unidentified gentleman. The timing was impossible to ignore. "Do you know who paid him?" she asked quietly. "Not yet." William's gaze hardened. "But I intend to." Clara set the document down. A knot formed in her stomach. The situation had moved beyond suspicion. Someone had acted deliberately. Someone had wanted access to that carriage. "Why would anyone do this?" she whispered. William's expression remained unreadable. "That is the question." Neither spoke for a moment. Then Clara noticed another folder resting separately from the others. A familiar name appeared across the top page. Ashcombe. Her pulse skipped. William. His gaze followed hers. Silence settled briefly. Then he nodded once. "I asked questions." Clara looked at him carefully. "About Victoria?" "About everyone connected to recent rumors." The answer surprised her. "You investigated gossip." For the first time all evening, a trace of dry amusement appeared in his eyes. "I investigated patterns." Clara waited. William folded his hands together. "Several stories regarding our marriage originated from the same small social circle. Understanding began forming immediately." "And?" "Lady Victoria appears unusually connected to that circle." Clara stared at him. She wanted to reject the implication instantly. Victoria could be manipulative, ambitious, calculating. Yet arranging rumors felt different somehow. More deliberate. More cruel. "Do you have proof?" she asked. William's expression remained steady. "Not yet." Clara looked away. The fire crackled softly in the background. Part of her felt disappointed. Another part felt strangely relieved. Because if William was correct, then the rumors had never been about love. They had been about control. About influence. About winning. And that was somehow easier to understand. 2 evenings later, London hosted one of the season's largest musical performances. Nearly every notable family attended. Clara entered the grand concert hall expecting another evening of polite conversation and endless social obligations. Instead, she walked directly into the beginning of a public reversal. It started innocently enough. Several ladies approached her before the performance. Yet their conversations felt noticeably different. "Your Grace, the hospital expansion has been remarkable. The school in Surrey speaks very highly of your involvement. My sister met your steward in Yorkshire. She says your estate improvements have transformed the region." Clara responded graciously. Internally, she felt almost bewildered. The compliments were sincere. More importantly, they concerned her actual accomplishments. Not her marriage. Not gossip. Not Victoria. Just her. Margaret appeared at her side halfway through the evening carrying a triumphant expression. I told you this would happen. Clara sighed. What exactly is happening? Margaret looked delighted. Reality. How dramatic. I am serious. Margaret lowered her voice. People finally spent enough time around you to form independent opinions. Clara laughed softly. A revolutionary concept. Apparently. Then Margaret's gaze shifted toward the opposite side of the hall. Her smile disappeared. Clara followed her line of sight. Lady Victoria had arrived. Dressed in silver this evening, she looked as beautiful as ever. Yet something felt different. The reaction surrounding her seemed slightly cooler. More reserved. Not hostile. Simply cautious. Victoria noticed it too. Clara could tell immediately. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded hall. Victoria smiled. Clara returned the gesture politely. Yet neither looked away as quickly as before. The performance began shortly afterward. Music filled the hall. Applause followed each piece. Conversations resumed during intermission. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Then a small incident changed the evening. Clara stood speaking with Lady Fairmont and two elderly countesses when a gentleman nearby mentioned the carriage accident. The remark itself seemed harmless. Unfortunately, another guest responded. A terrible coincidence. Before Clara could answer, a third voice joined the discussion. Was it a coincidence? The question carried farther than intended. Silence spread through the nearby group. Clara recognized the speaker instantly. Victoria. Every eye turned toward her. Victoria appeared surprised by the attention. I merely meant that society has become fascinated by the story, she said smoothly. People do enjoy imagining conspiracies. Clara watched her carefully. Something felt wrong. Not the words. The timing. The tone. The eagerness. William appeared beside her almost immediately. Clara had not even seen him approach. Fortunately, he said calmly, facts tend to be more reliable than imagination. Victoria's smile flickered. Only slightly. Of course. William's gaze remained steady. Particularly when investigations are involved. Complete silence followed. Clara could practically feel dozens of people listening. Victoria's expression remained composed. Yet for the first time since her return, uncertainty appeared beneath the surface. It vanished quickly. Most guests never noticed. Clara did. William did. How reassuring. Victoria replied lightly. Then I am certain the truth will emerge. So am I. William answered. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet its impact rippled through the room immediately. Conversations resumed. Musicians returned. Society pretended nothing unusual had occurred. Nobody was fooled. Later that evening, as carriages lined up outside the concert hall, Margaret practically vibrated with excitement. Did you see her face? Clara settled into her seat. Margaret. I am merely observing. You are celebrating. Margaret smiled unapologetically. Perhaps a little. Across from them, William looked out the carriage window. Thoughtful. Focused. Clara studied him quietly. Something had changed in recent weeks. Not gradually. Fundamentally. The man who once insisted he would never love her now investigated threats, defended her publicly, and looked ready to dismantle half of London to uncover the truth. The realization felt dangerous. Because for the first time, Clara found herself wondering a question she had carefully avoided since their wedding. What if she was no longer the only one whose heart was changing? Back at Ashcombe House, Victoria stood alone in her drawing room staring into the fire. The evening had not gone according to plan. For months she had controlled the narrative, guided conversations, encouraged assumptions, directed attention exactly where she wanted it. Now the current was shifting. Worse, William had noticed. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter." A gentleman stepped inside carrying information she had requested earlier that day. Victoria listened carefully. Her expression grew colder with every sentence. When he finished, silence filled the room. "You are certain?" she asked. "Completely certain, my lady." The gentleman swallowed nervously. "The Duke has been asking questions about the rumors. And several people have connected them to your social circle." Victoria dismissed him moments later. Alone again, she stared into the fire for a very long time. Then she smiled. Not because she was pleased. Because she had reached a decision. If subtle influence no longer worked, another approach would be necessary. Somewhere deep inside, she knew time was running out. The Duchess she once dismissed as quiet and forgettable had become something far more dangerous. She had become impossible to remove. And for the first time, Victoria began preparing a final move. The letter was never meant for William to read. That fact became painfully clear the moment he unfolded the yellowed page and recognized Clara's handwriting. It happened entirely by accident. At least that was how it began. A rainy Thursday afternoon had driven most of London indoors. Clara spent the day visiting a charitable orphanage on the opposite side of the city. William remained at Blackthorn House reviewing estate records in the library. Several hours into the task, Bennet entered carrying a small wooden box recently discovered among documents transferred from an unused storage room. "We found this among the older household papers, Your Grace." William glanced up. "What is it?" "We believe it belongs to Her Grace." Bennet set the box upon the desk. "It appears to have been misplaced during renovations months ago." William nodded. "Have it returned to her when she arrives home." "Of course, Your Grace." The butler departed. William intended to leave the box untouched. He genuinely did. Then a folded paper slipped partially through a narrow gap in the lid. The movement caught his attention. Nothing more. He reached forward only to prevent damage. The paper slid free into his hand before he realized what was happening. Instinctively he glanced down. One sentence stared back at him. "I hope he never learns what this marriage truly cost me." William froze. The room became impossibly quiet. For several seconds he simply stared at the words. Then common sense instructed him to stop reading immediately. The letter belonged to Clara. It was private. Personal. Not his. Yet something in the sentence held him captive. Before he could stop himself, his eyes moved lower. The letter was dated nearly a year before their wedding. Addressed to Margaret Penhurst. William sat down slowly. Every instinct argued against continuing. Another instinct, stronger and infinitely more dangerous, refused to look away. Clara's handwriting flowed elegantly across the page. "Margaret keeps asking whether I regret my decision. I tell her no because it is easier than explaining the truth. The truth is that I am frightened. Not of becoming a duchess. Not of London. Not even of the responsibilities. I am frightened because I know exactly what awaits me." William felt something tighten painfully in his chest. His gaze continued downward. "Everyone believes I am fortunate. Perhaps I am. William Blackthorn is an honorable man. He will never treat me cruelly. Yet kindness is not the same as being wanted. I think that is the part people do not understand." Silence surrounded him. Rain tapped softly against the library windows. The fire crackled quietly nearby. William could hear none of it. "I know his heart belongs to a memory. I know I will never replace it. I know he does not love me and probably never will." The words blurred briefly before William realized why. He had stopped breathing. He forced himself to inhale. The letter continued. Even so, I cannot allow Blackthorn Estate to fall. Too many families depend upon it. Too many livelihoods. Father says sacrifice only matters when it costs something. If that is true, then perhaps this sacrifice will matter very much indeed. William closed his eyes. For one long moment he could not move. Could not think. Could barely exist. When he finally opened his eyes again, he read the final paragraph. I am grateful he agreed to the marriage. I only wish he did not look so unhappy every time he sees me. The letter ended there. No bitterness. No resentment. No accusations. Somehow that made it infinitely worse. William lowered the page onto the desk. His hands felt strangely unsteady. The memory of their wedding night rose without invitation. I will never love you. The words echoed through his mind with merciless clarity. At the time he had believed he was being honest. Fair. Responsible. Now he realized something devastating. Honesty without compassion could still wound. Clara had known exactly what awaited her. She had stepped into that future anyway. And what had he given her in return? Distance. Formality. Gratitude never spoken aloud. Respect never properly expressed. The realization hurt more than he thought possible. Hours later, Clara returned home unaware that anything had changed. Rain still fell steadily outside. She handed her cloak to a servant and entered the library expecting to find William buried beneath paperwork. Instead she found him standing near the window. Waiting. The sight alone felt unusual. Good afternoon, she said. William turned toward her. For a second she forgot the rest of her sentence. Something in his expression immediately captured her attention. Is everything all right? His gaze moved briefly toward the wooden box resting on the desk. Clara recognized it instantly. Alarm flickered across her face. Then she saw the folded letter beside it. The color drained from her cheeks. Silence filled the room. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Clara understood at once. He had read it. Not all of it, perhaps. Enough. More than enough. William. Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. I can explain. He crossed the room before she finished. Not hurriedly. Not dramatically. Simply with quiet certainty. You do not owe me an explanation. Clara stared at him. I should have destroyed that letter years ago. A faint, sad smile touched his face. I am glad you did not. She looked away immediately. Embarrassment burned through her. The letter contained thoughts she never intended anyone to see. Certainly not him. It was private, she said softly. I know. His voice carried genuine regret. I never intended to read it. Clara believed him. That somehow made everything more difficult. Silence stretched between them. Then William spoke again. You thought I was unhappy every time I looked at you. Clara laughed softly without humor. At the beginning. She finally met his eyes. You were. The honesty landed with painful accuracy. William could not deny it. Yes, he admitted. I was. Clara nodded once. There was no anger in her expression. No accusation. Only truth. Somehow that hurt most of all. I never blamed you for it, she said quietly. You should have. Why? William looked at her as though the answer should be obvious. Because I was wrong. Clara blinked. The conviction in his voice startled her. William took another step forward. I spent months believing I understood our marriage. His gaze never left hers. I understood nothing. The room seemed very still. Rain continued beyond the windows. Distant thunder rolled somewhere across London. Neither noticed. William. Clara began. He shook his head. No. Let me finish. The intensity in his voice silenced her immediately. "You saved my estate," he said quietly. "You protected hundreds of people who depended upon Blackthorn lands." His jaw tightened. "You sacrificed opportunities, happiness, a future you might have chosen differently." Clara opened her mouth to object. William continued before she could. "And throughout all of it, you asked for nothing." Emotion threatened his composure. Clara could hear it, see it. For perhaps the first time since she had known him, William Blackthorn looked completely defenseless. "I do not know how to make that right," he admitted. The confession hung between them. Raw, honest, unexpected. Clara felt her chest tighten painfully. "There is nothing to make right," she whispered. "There is." His voice remained firm. "More than you realize." Neither spoke after that. Words suddenly seemed inadequate. Eventually Clara stepped closer. Close enough to see the exhaustion beneath his eyes. The sincerity. The regret. "William," she said softly, "I made my choice freely." He looked at her. "Why?" The question emerged almost helplessly. "Why choose me?" Clara's breath caught. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one of them. She considered giving a careful answer, a practical answer. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "Because I respected you." William stared at her. Even then. Especially then. A faint smile touched her lips. "You were stubborn. Difficult. Entirely too serious." To her surprise, a reluctant laugh escaped him. Clara continued. "But you were honorable." Silence followed. Then she added the part she had never intended to say aloud. "I knew I would be safe with you." William closed his eyes briefly. Safe. The word struck deeper than any declaration could have. Because he suddenly realized how much that trust meant. How easily he could have failed it. A knock shattered the moment. Both stepped back automatically. Bennett entered carrying an evening newspaper. His expression appeared unusually troubled. "My apologies," he said. "But I believed your grace should see this immediately." William accepted the paper. Clara watched his expression change as he read the front page. Whatever warmth existed moments earlier vanished, replaced by cold disbelief. "What is it?" she asked. William handed her the newspaper. Clara looked down. The article occupied nearly half the page. Her pulse quickened with every line. Anonymous sources claimed the Whitmore family had deliberately manipulated financial negotiations to force the marriage. Worse, the article implied Clara knowingly deceived Blackthorn estate for personal gain. By the time she finished reading, her hands had begun to tremble. "This is absurd," she whispered. William's expression darkened. "It is deliberate." Clara looked up slowly. Understanding arrived all at once. Someone had launched a direct attack. Not on the marriage. On her reputation. On her character. On everything she had sacrificed to protect. The room fell silent. Outside, rain battered the windows harder than before. Somewhere across London, Lady Victoria Ashcombe folded an identical newspaper and smiled faintly. The article would spread through society by morning. By afternoon it would become scandal. By evening every drawing room in England would be discussing the Duchess of Blackthorn. Victoria believed she had finally found the weapon capable of destroying Clara. What she did not realize was that she had also given William something else. A reason to fight. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Blackthorn intended to fight for his wife with everything he had. By the next morning, the scandal had spread exactly as intended. Newspapers repeated the allegations. Drawing rooms dissected them. Gentlemen debated them in clubs. Ladies discussed them over tea. The story grew with every retelling. By noon, some versions claimed Clara's family had engineered the entire marriage. Others suggested she had manipulated financial negotiations for personal advancement. The most outrageous versions portrayed her as a calculating social climber who had trapped one of England's most powerful dukes. None of it was true. That did not stop people from repeating it. Clara sat in the breakfast room staring at a newspaper she had already read twice. Across from her, William had not touched his coffee. His expression remained calm. Anyone who did not know him would have believed he felt nothing. Clara knew better now. "You do not need to attend Lady Pembroke's reception this afternoon," he said quietly. Clara looked up. "Because people will be talking. Because I would prefer to spare you unnecessary discomfort." She folded the newspaper carefully. "If I stay home, they will assume the article is true." William's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. "Then I am attending with you." Clara blinked. "You already have parliamentary obligations." "Not anymore." "William." "Cancelled." The answer came without hesitation. For a moment she simply stared at him. 6 months ago, the Duke of Blackthorn would never have rearranged an entire day because of society gossip. The realization warmed her despite everything. "You cannot fight all of London," she said softly. His grey eyes met hers. "Watch me." Despite the circumstances, a small laugh escaped her. The sound seemed to ease something inside him. Later that afternoon, Lady Pembroke's reception proved even worse than Clara expected. The moment she entered the ballroom, conversations faltered. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just long enough. The effect felt unmistakable. Everyone had read the article. Everyone wanted to see her reaction. Clara kept her head high. She greeted acquaintances politely. She smiled when appropriate. She refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. Yet beneath the surface, the scrutiny felt exhausting. William remained beside her throughout the afternoon. That alone created a secondary wave of whispers. The Duke of Blackthorn rarely attached himself to social events. Today he seemed determined not to leave her side. Lady Havisham approached first. "Your Grace." Her expression carried genuine sympathy. "I hope you know that sensible people do not believe such nonsense." Clara smiled. "Thank you." Others followed. Some offered support. Some offered awkward reassurances. A few offered nothing at all, which Clara appreciated most. Then she saw Victoria. The woman stood near the center of the room surrounded by admirers. Dressed in ivory silk, she looked every bit the elegant society favorite. For several seconds their eyes met across the crowd. Victoria smiled first. Clara returned the gesture. Neither woman looked away immediately. Margaret appeared beside Clara moments later. "I would very much like to say something inappropriate." Clara sighed. "Then please do not." "I make no promises." Margaret glanced toward Victoria. "She looks nervous." Clara almost dismissed the observation. Then she looked more carefully. Margaret was right. The signs were subtle. A touch too much composure. A smile held a fraction too long. Tiny details most people would never notice. Clara did. Before she could consider the matter further, a gentleman nearby raised his voice. Surely the article cannot be entirely fabricated. Silence spread through the surrounding group. Clara felt every eye turn toward her. The gentleman immediately looked embarrassed. Yet the damage was done. The question now hung openly in the air. Nobody seemed willing to answer it. Then William stepped forward. "It is entirely fabricated." His voice carried across the room with perfect clarity. The gentleman swallowed. "I meant no offense, Your Grace." "Then perhaps avoid repeating lies." William replied calmly. The silence deepened. Several nearby guests exchanged startled glances. Clara had never seen him this direct in public before. Neither had most of London. The gentleman hurriedly excused himself. Conversations resumed. Yet something fundamental had shifted. William remained beside Clara. Unmoving. Unapologetic. Protective. The message could not have been clearer if he had announced it from a stage. Hours later, as the reception finally ended, Clara and William prepared to leave. They had nearly reached the entrance hall when a voice stopped them. William. The use of his given name immediately drew attention. Victoria approached slowly. Several nearby guests pretended not to watch. Nobody succeeded. "May I speak with you?" she asked. William's expression remained neutral. "You may speak now." Victoria hesitated. Clara instantly understood why. She had expected privacy. William had deliberately denied it. "I only wish to say how unfortunate this entire situation has become," Victoria said softly. "The article was cruel." "Yes," William replied. Victoria studied him. "I hope whoever is responsible is discovered." "So do I." The answer sounded perfectly polite. Yet something beneath it felt dangerous. Victoria seemed to sense it as well. For the first time since Clara met her, uncertainty appeared openly on her face. "You believe I had something to do with it," she said quietly. The entrance hall became utterly silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. William looked at her steadily. "I believe many interesting connections are beginning to emerge." Victoria's composure cracked. Only for a second. But it happened. Clara saw it. Several others saw it too. "That is a serious accusation," Victoria replied. "No," William said calmly. "That is an observation." The silence that followed felt enormous. Victoria looked away first. Moments later she excused herself and departed. The whispers began instantly. By the time Clara and William reached their carriage, half the room was discussing the exchange. Neither spoke during the journey home. Not because there was nothing to say. Because too much remained unspoken. When they finally arrived at Blackthorn House, Bennet informed them of an unexpected visitor. "Lady Margaret has been waiting in the library for nearly an hour." Clara blinked. That cannot be good. It was not. Margaret rose the moment they entered. Her expression looked unusually serious. "I have news." William closed the library door behind them. "What kind of news?" Margaret handed over a folded packet of papers. "The kind that may destroy someone." Clara felt a chill. William opened the packet and began reading. His expression darkened with every page. "Where did you get these?" Margaret folded her arms. "A friend owed me a favor." Apparently another friend owed him a favor. Eventually several servants became surprisingly cooperative. Clara stared at them both. "Would someone explain?" William looked up slowly. "The rumors." His voice had become dangerously quiet. "The newspaper article. The social campaign against you. The payments connected to the Carriage investigation." He paused. "They all lead back to the same source." Clara's pulse quickened. Deep down, she already knew the answer. William met her gaze. "Victoria." Silence filled the room. "Complete. Absolute." Clara sank slowly into a chair. Not because the revelation shocked her. Because seeing it confirmed felt strangely heartbreaking. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Margaret exhaled sharply. "There is more." William looked down at the remaining papers. His expression hardened further. "How is that possible?" Margaret's voice softened. "Because she is planning one final move." Clara felt dread settle inside her chest. "What kind of move?" Neither answered immediately. William handed her the final document. Clara read the first few lines and felt the blood drain from her face. An invitation. A guest list. A private correspondence. Evidence of a carefully arranged public confrontation scheduled for the upcoming Blackwood Grand Ball, the most important social event of the season. The realization struck instantly. Victoria was not finished. She intended to humiliate Clara publicly in front of all of London. William took the papers back. His expression had become cold enough to silence an army. Then we attend the ball. Clara looked up. William. His gaze never wavered. And this ends there. Outside, evening shadows settled across London. Carriages rolled through crowded streets. News travelled from house to house. The Blackwood Grand Ball was only days away. Society expected another scandal. Another spectacle. Another chapter in a story they believed they understood. They were wrong. Because for the first time since this began, Clara would not be standing alone. And for the first time, the Duke of Blackthorn was ready to choose exactly where he stood. The Blackwood Grand Ball arrived beneath a sky filled with stars and anticipation. By sunset, half of London seemed determined to attend. Carriages lined the streets surrounding Blackwood Manor. Crystal lanterns illuminated the sprawling estate. Music drifted through open windows. Servants moved with military precision as guests arrived one after another. Society expected a spectacle. For once, society was correct. Clara stood before the mirror in her dressing room at Blackthorn House while her maid adjusted the final details of her gown. The silver silk shimmered softly beneath candlelight. A sapphire necklace rested against her throat. Her appearance was flawless. Unfortunately, flawless appearances did little to calm nerves. "You look beautiful, Your Grace," the maid said quietly. Clara smiled. "Thank you." The maid hesitated. "People will see the truth eventually." Clara looked up. The young woman immediately blushed. "Forgive me. I should not have spoken." "No," Clara said gently. "Perhaps you should have." The maid smiled and finished her work. Minutes later, Clara descended the staircase. William waited in the entrance hall. The moment he saw her, he stopped moving. Completely. Clara noticed immediately. So did Bennett. So did every servant within sight. The silence lasted only seconds. Yet it felt strangely significant. "You are staring," Clara said softly. William seemed to recover himself. "Yes." A faint smile touched his face. "Apparently I am." Heat rose unexpectedly into Clara's cheeks. She looked away first. Some things remain dangerous no matter how often they happened. The journey to Blackwood Manor passed in unusual quiet. Not uncomfortable silence. Anticipatory silence. Both understood what awaited them. Neither felt the need to discuss it again. By the time their carriage arrived, the estate already blazed with light. Hundreds of guests filled the grand ballroom. Chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Fresh flowers decorated every column and staircase. Music floated through the air. Conversations flowed in every direction. Yet the moment the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn entered, attention shifted. Clara felt it immediately. So did William. News had spread quickly. Everyone knew about the newspaper article. Everyone knew about the rumors. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The only question involved timing. Well, Margaret appeared beside them within minutes. "This feels subtle." Clara laughed despite herself. "You define subtle very differently than most people." Margaret scanned the ballroom. "Victoria is here." Clara followed her gaze. Lady Victoria Ashcombe stood near the far side of the room speaking with several prominent guests. Her expression remained perfectly composed. Elegant. Confident. Prepared. For a brief moment their eyes met. Victoria smiled. Clara returned the gesture. Then both looked away. The evening progressed slowly at first. Conversations. Introductions. Music. Dancing. Society pretending nothing unusual existed while focusing on nothing else. Clara maintained her composure. Years of practice made that possible. Yet beneath the surface she remained alert. Waiting. Across the ballroom, William appeared equally aware. Every time she looked toward him, she found his attention already on her. It happened often enough that eventually she stopped pretending not to notice. Nearly an hour passed before the confrontation began. It started innocently. Victoria approached a group near the center of the ballroom. Several influential families stood nearby. The Earl and Countess of Blackwood themselves occupied the center of the gathering. More importantly, dozens of guests lingered close enough to overhear. Clara recognized the setup immediately. So did William. Victoria's voice carried beautifully. Soft enough to appear private. Loud enough to travel. "It is unfortunate," she said, "when misunderstandings become public scandals." Several guests nodded politely. Victoria sighed. "I only hope everyone involved can find peace." Clara watched from across the room. The opening move felt almost disappointing. Too obvious. Too rehearsed. Unfortunately, Victoria was only beginning. Particularly when financial arrangements become confused, she continued. Families can suffer so terribly when ambition overtakes honesty. Silence spread through the gathering. Not complete silence. Interested silence. Curious silence. The most dangerous kind. Clara felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. Victoria appeared regretful. Sympathetic. Concerned. It was an impressive performance. Surely, someone said carefully. "You do not mean the recent article." Victoria lowered her gaze. "I would never discuss private matters publicly." The statement accomplished exactly the opposite. More guests gathered. More attention focused. The trap closed neatly. Clara understood what Victoria wanted. A reaction. Anger. Embarrassment. Anything that could be interpreted as guilt. Instead, Clara remained still. Calm. Silent. Yet before she could decide how to respond, another voice entered the conversation. "That is fortunate," William said. The room froze. Every single person present turned toward him. The Duke of Blackthorn crossed the ballroom with measured confidence. His expression revealed nothing. That somehow made him more intimidating. Victoria smiled. "Your Grace." William stopped beside Clara. Not near her. Beside her. The distinction mattered. Society noticed. "Lady Victoria," he replied. Silence followed. Victoria's composure remained impressive. Yet Clara noticed a slight tension around her eyes. The first crack. "I was merely expressing concern," Victoria said softly. "Naturally," William replied. "You have expressed concern for many months." A ripple moved through the crowd. Tiny. Nearly invisible. Yet unmistakable. Victoria's smile faltered. "I do not understand." "Then allow me to clarify." William's voice remained calm. Controlled. Deadly. He removed several folded papers from his coat. The sight alone transformed the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. "The rumors regarding my wife originated within a specific social network," he said. The newspaper article relied upon information supplied by anonymous sources connected to that same network. Victoria stared at him. Clara could almost hear her calculating. Searching for a response. An escape. A weakness. William continued before she found one. The stable worker involved in the carriage sabotage received payments traced through intermediaries connected to that same network. Complete silence. The ballroom felt enormous and impossibly small at the same time. Victoria's face lost color. Not much. Enough. This is outrageous, she said. Indeed. William agreed. I thought so too. Several guests exchanged stunned glances. Others appeared horrified. The truth was becoming visible. Publicly. Irreversibly. Victoria straightened. Desperation hid beneath her elegance now. You are accusing me without proof. William unfolded one of the documents. Unfortunately for you, there is proof. He handed the papers directly to Lord Blackwood. The older nobleman reviewed them briefly. His expression darkened immediately. Then he passed them to his wife. Then another guest. Then another. The evidence began moving through the crowd. Reactions followed. Shock. Disbelief. Disgust. Victoria saw it happen. For the first time, fear entered her eyes. Real fear. William, she whispered. You cannot believe. I believe facts, he interrupted. The words landed with absolute finality. Victoria looked toward Clara. Perhaps hoping for mercy. Perhaps hoping for hesitation. She found neither. Clara felt no triumph. Only sadness. This entire situation could have been avoided. Yet Victoria had chosen it repeatedly. You wanted society to believe my wife manipulated our marriage. William said. The truth is exactly the opposite. His gaze shifted toward the crowd. Clara Whitmore saved Blackthorn Estate. Silence deepened. She protected hundreds of families who depended upon our lands. William continued. She sacrificed opportunities most people would never understand. His voice grew stronger with every word. And she did so without seeking recognition. Without demanding gratitude. Without asking for anything in return. Clara felt her breath catch. The ballroom disappeared. The crowd disappeared. Only William remained. The finest thing that ever happened to Blackthorn Estate was not an investment, he said quietly. It was my wife. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Some guests looked openly emotional. Others appeared ashamed. Victoria stood frozen. Defeated. Forgotten. Because the story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Clara. William turned fully toward the crowd. Anyone who questions my wife's integrity questions mine as well. The declaration echoed through the ballroom. Clear. Unmistakable. Public. Final. A wave of understanding moved through the room. Society had just witnessed something rare. Not scandal. Not gossip. Loyalty. Absolute loyalty. Lord Blackwood stepped forward first. Her Grace deserves an apology. Several others immediately agreed. Then more. Then more. Within minutes the atmosphere transformed completely. The reversal happened so quickly it felt almost unreal. Guests approached Clara one after another. Offering support. Respect. Admiration. Not because William demanded it. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. Through it all, Clara remained standing beside him. Unable to speak. Unable to look away. Eventually the crowd dispersed enough to allow a moment of privacy. Or as much privacy as two aristocrats could achieve in a ballroom. Clara turned toward William. You should not have done that, she whispered. A familiar answer appeared immediately. The same answer he always gave now. Yes. His grey eyes never left hers. I should have. The music resumed somewhere behind them. Conversations returned. Society moved forward. Yet something fundamental had changed forever. Clara looked at the man beside her and realized the greatest mystery was no longer whether William Blackthorn cared for her. The mystery was how much. And for the first time, she was almost afraid to learn the answer. 1 year after their wedding, Blackthorn Estate looked different. Not because the buildings had changed. Not because the land itself had transformed. The difference lived in the people. Fields flourished. Tenant families prospered. New schools operated across the estate. Charitable projects expanded throughout London. Everywhere Clara's influence touched, improvement followed. The servants spoke of her with affection. The tenants spoke of her with gratitude. Even Parliament occasionally spoke of her with admiration. Much to William's amusement. On a warm summer afternoon, Clara stood in the estate gardens watching children chase one another across a wide lawn. The air carried the scent of roses. Bees drifted lazily between blossoms. Somewhere nearby, a fountain splashed softly. For the first time in many years, life felt peaceful. Truly peaceful. The scandal had disappeared months ago. Victoria had quietly left London after the truth became impossible to deny. Society had moved on to newer stories. More importantly, Clara no longer cared what society thought. She heard footsteps behind her. She smiled before turning around. "You are late." William stopped beside her. "I am a duke." "We prefer the term delayed by matters of state." Clara laughed softly. "A very impressive excuse." "Thank you." They stood together beneath the afternoon sunlight. Comfortable silence settled between them. It happened often now. Neither rushed to fill every moment with conversation. Neither feared quiet anymore. Their relationship had changed gradually after the Blackwood ball. Not through dramatic declarations. Through 1,000 small choices. Shared breakfasts. Evening walks. Honest conversations. Unspoken support. Trust deepened first. Everything else followed. Clara glanced sideways. "Did Parliament survive without you?" "Barely." "How tragic." William looked at her with unmistakable fondness. The expression still startled her sometimes. Not because it was rare. Because it was no longer rare. Nearly a year earlier he had struggled to smile. Now she occasionally caught him doing it without realizing. The discovery never failed to please her. They continued walking through the gardens until they reached a secluded stone bench overlooking a lake. Sunlight danced across the water. The scene felt almost unreal in its tranquility. William stopped walking. Clara noticed immediately. Something in his posture had changed. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer right away. Instead he reached into his coat and removed a folded piece of paper. Clara frowned. "Should I be concerned?" "Probably." His voice carried a hint of nervousness. That alone captured her full attention. William Blackthorne did not become nervous. Yet somehow he looked exactly that. He handed her the paper. Clara unfolded it carefully. The moment she recognized the handwriting, her breath caught. Her own handwriting. The letter. The one he had accidentally read months ago. The letter she had written before their marriage. She looked up. "William." He took a slow breath. "There is a sentence I have been thinking about for a year." Clara's pulse quickened. She already knew which sentence. Somehow that made it worse. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes." His gaze held hers. "I do." The familiar answer brought an unexpected smile to her lips. Then it faded as he continued. "On our wedding night, I told you something." Clara remained very still. The memory rose immediately. The room. The candles. The certainty in his voice. "William." "No." He shook his head gently. "Please let me finish." The intensity in his expression silenced her. He looked down briefly. Then back at her. "I told you I would never love you." The words hung between them. Older now. Different somehow. Stripped of power. Stripped of certainty. Clara felt her chest tighten. Not from pain. From memory. I remember, she whispered. William nodded. I know you do. For a moment he stared across the lake. When he spoke again, his voice sounded rougher than usual. More vulnerable. I thought I understood myself then. A faint smile touched his face. I was wrong about almost everything. Clara watched him carefully. Every instinct told her this moment mattered. You saved my estate. William continued quietly. You protected my family. You protected people you had never met. His gaze returned to hers. You believed in me when I gave you absolutely no reason to. Emotion flickered across his face. Honest and unguarded. You walked into a marriage knowing exactly how little I had to offer. Clara's eye stung unexpectedly. That is not true. It is. His voice remained gentle. And somehow you still chose me. Silence settled around them. The world seemed to narrow until only the two of them remained. The lake. The garden. The sunlight. Everything else faded away. William stepped closer. For a long time, I believed gratitude was what I felt. Clara's breath caught. Then I thought it was admiration. He smiled faintly. Then respect. Another step closer. Then concern. His eyes never left hers. Then I nearly lost you. The carriage accident. Clara remembered the fear in his voice. The panic he could not hide. William continued. And I realized I could not breathe at the thought of a world without you in it. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. She did not look away. Neither did he. You are the first person I want to speak to every morning, he said softly. The person I look for in every crowded room. His voice lowered further. The person whose happiness matters more to me than my own. Clara felt a tear slide down her cheek. She made no effort to hide it. William reached out and gently brushed it away. I spent a year trying to find the right words, he admitted. It turns out there are only 3. The world stopped. Completely. Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Nothing else. William's expression held no hesitation now. No fear. Only certainty. Absolute certainty. I love you. The words arrived simply. Quietly. Yet they carried the weight of everything that came before. Every sacrifice. Every misunderstanding. Every moment of growth. Every step that brought them here. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Not because she doubted him. Because she had imagined this moment too many times to count. And reality somehow felt better. When she opened her eyes again, William looked almost concerned. The sight nearly made her laugh through her tears. Say something, he said softly. Clara tilted her head. That is a remarkably commanding tone for a love confession. Relief and laughter appeared together in his expression. I am attempting dignity. You are failing. I suspected as much. For several seconds they simply looked at each other. Then Clara smiled. A real smile. The kind she reserved for very few people. Do you remember what I told you on our wedding night? William groaned softly. Vividly. Clara stepped closer. Close enough to hear his breathing. Close enough to see every emotion he no longer bothered hiding. You said you would never love me. Yes. His expression turned serious again. I was wrong. Clara smiled. Very wrong. Painfully wrong. She nodded in agreement. Then reached for his hand. Good. William blinked. Good? Yes. Her smile deepened. Because now I am finally ready to tell you something too. Hope appeared instantly in his eyes. Clara found that adorable. She intended to tease him about it for the rest of their lives. I love you too, she said softly. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke. The words settled between them. Warm. Certain. Home. Then William laughed quietly. The sound held pure happiness. Clara realized she had never heard that particular laugh before. Not once. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. William. I am simply wondering how I became the luckiest man in England." Clara rolled her eyes. "That is a terrible line." "Possibly. Definitely." He smiled. "And yet it is still true." The afternoon sunlight stretched across the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. A fountain continued its gentle song. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Better. A year earlier their marriage had begun with distance, duty, and a promise that should never have been made. Now it stood upon trust, respect, friendship, and love earned honestly over time. Not because either of them was perfect. Because both had chosen to grow together. Later, long after the sun began sinking toward the horizon, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn walked back toward the house side by side. Neither rushed. Neither needed to. They had finally arrived exactly where they were meant to be. And for the first time since the day they married, the future no longer felt uncertain. It felt shared.